Greetings, everyone, and no, that's not it. Good evening. I am Sam, and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where tonight we shall be revisiting old doubly old stories. Ones that were written a long time ago, but also ones that we read a long-ish time ago. Hi. Just pause the Sam read short stories video, so it might get a bit confusing. Oh, right, yeah, just... Your dog, I heard you like short stories, so we put some short stories in your short stories, so you can short story while you short story. Hello. Oh, Lynn, oh no. I know everything you have described there. Yes. I shan't read it out. Because I know at least one amongst us, even though she's not here possibly right at the moment, has phobias about that sort of thing, but don't worry about it. That's not trying to make you feel bad. That sucks. I identify, I relate. It sucks. Yeah, I know. I am sorry to hear that. I feel like I pretty much instantly know what you are going through. So yeah, do what you've got to do for the self-cares, alright? But yes, hi, hello everyone. I am here with a stack of books in front of me. It makes it sound like I've got like 30 short stories to go through. I've got probably at most 5. I genuinely don't think I'm going to get through all 5 short stories that I've prepared, because some of them are long, and like one of them could take up like an entire half of a stream. So I'm going to try and get onto them pretty quickly so we can actually get through more than 2. So yeah, exactly, Perula. All my thoughts are books. But yeah, how are everyone? How am you all? Are you good? Are you well? It is Thursday? Yes, Thursday today. Book week continues apace. But, you know, like a chill kind of pace. It's not rushed. It's sort of a lazy marathon that we're doing here, I guess. And yeah, I hope that you're well. Hope you're enjoying things so far. You know, that we've perhaps given you something new, or given you something fun or unexpected, fun-expected even, if you wish to portmanteau that, on one of these evenings, because we've got more to come. With after this, tomorrow being Friday, Lucy is going to be reading you some comedy, some Woodhouse comedy specifically. Let's get one of these in chat. There we go. Thank you, Stream Elements. Yeah, that is what has happened, which you can view on the YouTube archives. We've been, you know, as ever, archiving stuff on YouTube. So if you've missed anything, it's all up there. And will continue to be so as we cross off the list. Piroli, you picked lots of blueberries today, so you're gonna have some of those for snack later. Nice. Hey, Lucy. Hello. Welcome. Erin, you've come down with tiredness after adrenaline, so you're chilling before bedtime. Fair enough. Then let us provide some of that. Yeah, on the schedule for tonight, we have The Signalman by Charles Dickens. I've already queued Lucy up with links for all of these, so are you still not had dinner but you've been trying to be around? Oh, okay, I'll be ready to drop links in case you're not here for any of those. That is fine. Yes, we have The Signalman by Charles Dickens, which Lucy originally read. We have The Ghost Ship by Richard Middleton, which is it's a bit offbeat, but it's fun. A little bit silly, but I really like it. It's got some good character. Man Size in Marble by Edith Nesbit, who I believe wrote The Railway Children. It's quite a change of pace to The Railway Children. It'll be alright to drop links to drop the first link, most likely. Okay, cool. What else? I have The Body-Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson, because I've discovered on recently rereading Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I really like Stevenson's writing, and the atmosphere that he creates. It's very good. Those are the main ones that I was planning, and if I have time, which is, if I do all of those, unlikely, but we'll see, and especially if I sit here talking for ages, we'll see. The Spectre Bridegroom by Washington Irving. So, you know, it's like, oh, we've got Robert Louis Stevenson. Oh, Jekyll and Hyde. No, the other one. And we've got Washington Irving. Ooh, Sleepy Hollow. No, the other one. So, you know, we're bringing you the hipster classics, not the popular ones, not the ones that everyone knows. No, these are others. But yeah, I guess I don't know. I'm not because we've been doing this so much this week. I don't really have much to catch up on. It's Thursday. I spoke to you on Tuesday. Yeah, I don't know. We did some sci-fi then. That was fun, wasn't it? If I'm reading one Lucy read before, can we compare and contrast your Dickens technique? No. It's. I mean, to be honest, I read through this one earlier today, and compared to, say, what Lucy's been reading in Tale of Two Cities, this felt much more restrained and straightforward. It didn't quite feel like it had the sort of larger than life characters and characterization. I guess maybe also because it's a short story, so you've got to be a little bit sharper in terms of how you get in and how you get out. Probably you've been continuing anti-memetics. Hey, we got one. Love the weirdness. Yes, good success. I'm glad. Yeah, I really enjoyed that book. As I think I said on the stream, it goes places. I don't know whereabouts you are. I'm not going to spoil things, don't worry. And I hope that's not a spoiler for you, because I appreciate that it could be. But I really enjoyed it to the end. So yeah, I hope you get on with it. Erin, you're down for that too? You have to see if there's audiobooks for it. For what? For anti-memetics. I don't know if there will be, because I guess it would have to be like an Amazon generated one or something. I don't know, because they're self-published on Amazon, and then, they're not, in the grand scheme of things, a big author. So yeah, I don't know. Oh, you've only read the next chapter after what I read? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's good. I enjoyed it, as I've said 3 times already in the history of this stream. So yeah, how are you? Are you well? I hope so. I've said that already. Yeah, okay, well I guess I'm just going to crack on really, because as I say, we've got a lot. So I don't know, Lucy, if you're there, please feel free to give us a link to The Signalman, which I think is about maybe the first, I don't know, it's like a superhero or something. I'm not sure. I don't know if he shows up in the MCU, but yeah, true facts, true story. Charles Dickens created the first superhero, Signalman. His theme tune was Signalman. Chuff 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 chuff. It didn't catch on. Anyway, this, excuse the creaky chair, this is The Signalman by Charles Dickens. Hello, below there. When he heard a voice thus calling to him, he was standing at the door of his box with a flag in his hand furled round its short pole. One would have thought, considering the nature of the ground, that he could not have doubted from what quarter the voice came, but instead of looking up to where I stood, on the top of the steep cutting nearly over his head, he turned himself about and looked down the line. There was something remarkable in his manner of doing so, though I could not have said for my life what. But I know it was remarkable enough to attract my notice, even though his figure was foreshortened and shadowed down in the deep trench, and mine was high above him, so steeped in the glow of an angry sunset that I had shaded my eyes with my hand before I saw him at all. "Hello! Below!" From looking down the line, he turned himself about again, and, raising his eyes, saw my figure high above him. "Is there any path by which I can come down and speak to you?" Chair is creaking a good one. He looked up at me without replying, and I looked down at him without pressing him too soon with a repetition of my idle question. Just then there came a vague vibration in the earth and air, quickly changing into a violent pulsation, and an oncoming rush that caused me to start back, as though it had forced to draw me down. When such vapour as rose to my height from this rapid train had passed me, and was skimming away over the landscape, I looked down again, and saw him refurling the flag he had shown while the train went by. I repeated my inquiry. After a pause, during which he seemed to regard me with fixed attention, he motioned with his rolled-up flag towards a point on my level, some 200 or 300 yards distant. I called down to him, "All right," and made for that point. There, by dint of looking closely about me, I found a rough zigzag descending path notched out, which I followed. The cutting was extremely deep and unusually precipitate. It was made through a clammy stone that became oozier and wetter as I went down. For these reasons I found the way long enough to give me time to recall a singular air of reluctance or compulsion with which he had pointed out the path. When I came down low enough upon the zigzag descent to see him again, I saw that he was standing between the rails, on the way by which the train had lately passed, in an attitude as if he were waiting for me to appear. He had his left hand at his chin, and that left elbow rested on his right hand crossed over his breast. His attitude was one of such expectation and watchfulness that I stopped a moment, wondering at it. I resumed my downward way, and stepping out upon the level of the railroad, and drawing nearer to him, saw that he was a dark, sallow man, with a dark beard and rather heavy eyebrows. His post was in as solitary and dismal a place as ever I saw. On either side a dripping wet wall of jagged stone, excluding all view but a strip of sky, and perspective one way only a crooked prolongation of this great dungeon, the shorter perspective, in the other direction, terminating in a gloomy red light, and the gloomier entrance to a black tunnel, in whose massive architecture there was a barbarous, depressing, and forbidding air. So little sunlight ever found its way to this spot, that it had an earthly, deadly smell, and so much cold wind rushed through it, that it struck chill to me, as if I had left the natural world. Before he stirred, I was near enough to him to have touched him. Not even then removing his eyes from mine, he stepped back one step and lifted his hand. This was a lonesome post to occupy, I said, and it had riveted my attention when I looked down from up yonder. A visitor was a rarity, I should suppose, not an unwelcome rarity, I hoped. In me, he merely saw a man who had been shut up within narrow limits all his life, and who, being at last set free, had a newly awakened interest in these great works. To such purpose I spoke to him. But I am far from sure of the terms I used, for besides that I am not happy in opening any conversation, there was something in the man that daunted me. He directed a most curious look towards the red light near the tunnel's mouth, and looked all about it, as if something were missing from it, and then looked at me. That light was part of his charge, was it not? He answered in a low voice, "Don't you know it is?" The monstrous thought came into my mind as I perused the fixed eyes and the saturnine face that this was a spirit, not a man. I have speculated since whether there may have been infection in his mind. In my turn, I stepped back, but in making the action I detected in his eyes some latent fear of me. This put the monstrous thought to flight. "You look at me," I said, forcing a smile, "as if you had a dread of me." I was doubtful. He returned, "Whether I had seen you before." "Where?" He pointed to the red light he had looked at. "There," I said. Intently watchful of me, he replied, but without sound, "Yes." "My good fellow, what should I do there? However, be that as it may, I never was there. You may I'll start that bit again. My good fellow, what should I do there? However, be that as it may, I never was there, you may swear." "I think I may," he rejoined. "Yes, I am sure I may." His manner cleared like my own. He replied to my remarks with readiness and in well-chosen words. Had he much to do there? Yes. That was to say, he had enough responsibility to bear, but exactness and watchfulness were what was required of him, and of actual work, manual labour, he had next to none. To change that signal, to trim those lights, and to turn this iron handle now and then was all he had to do under that head. Regarding those many long and lonely hours of which I seemed to make so much, he could only say that the routine of his life had shaped itself into that form, and he had grown used to it. He had taught himself a language down here, if only to know it by sight, and to have formed his own crude ideas of its pronunciation could be called learning it. He had also worked at fractions and decimals and tried a little algebra, but he was, and had been, as a boy, a poor hand at figures. Was it necessary for him, when on duty, always to remain in that channel of damp air, and could he never rise into the sunshine between those high stone walls? Why, that depended upon times and circumstances. Under some conditions there would be less upon the line than under others, and the same held good as to certain hours of the day and night. In bright weather he did choose occasions for getting a little above these lower shadows, but being at all times liable to be called by his electric bell, and at such times listening for it with redoubled anxiety, the relief was less than I would suppose. He took me into his box, where there was a fire, a desk for an official book in which he had to make certain entries, a telegraphic instrument with its dial, face, and needles, and the little bell of which he had spoken. On my trusting that he would excuse the remark that he had been well educated, and, I hoped I might say without offence, perhaps educated above that station, he observed that instances of slight incongruity in such wise would rarely be found wanting among large bodies of men. That he had heard it was so in workhouses, in the police force, even in that last desperate resource, the army, and that he knew it was so more or less in any great railway staff. He had been, when young, if I could believe it, sitting in that hut, he scarcely could, a student of natural philosophy, and had attended lectures, but he had run wild, misused his opportunities, gone down and never risen again. He had no complaint to offer about that. He had made his bed, and he lay upon it. It was far too late to make another. All that I have here condensed he said in a quiet manner, with his grave dark regards divided between me and the fire. He threw in the word "sir" from time to time, and especially when he referred to his youth, as though to request me to understand that he claimed to be nothing but what I found him. He was several times interrupted by the little bell, and had to read off messages and send replies. Once he had to stand without the door and display a flag as a train passed, and make some verbal communication to the driver. In the discharge of his duties I observed him to be remarkably exact and vigilant, breaking off his discourse at a syllable, and remaining silent until what he had to do was done. In a word, I should have set this man down as one of the safest men to be employed in that capacity, but for the circumstance that, while he was speaking to me, he twice broke off with a fallen colour, turned his face towards the little bell when it did not ring, opened the door of the hut, which was kept shut to exclude the unhealthy damp, and looked out towards the red light near the mouth of the tunnel. On both of those occasions he came back to the fire with the inexplicable air upon him which I had remarked, without being able to define when we were so far asunder. Said I, when I rose to leave him, "You almost make me think that I have met with a contented man." I am afraid I must acknowledge that I said it to lead him on. "I believe I used to be so," he rejoined, in a low voice in which he had first spoken. "But I am troubled, sir. I am troubled." He would have recalled the words if he could. He had said them, however, and I took them up quickly. "With what? What is your trouble?" "It is very difficult to impart, sir. It is very, very difficult to speak of. If ever you make me another visit, I will try to tell you." "But I expressly intend to make you another visit. Say, when shall it be?" "I go off early in the morning, and I shall be on again at 10 tomorrow night, sir." "I will come at 11. He thanked me, and went out the door with me. "I'll show my white light, sir," he said in his peculiar low voice, "till you have found the way up. When you have found it, don't call out, and when you are at the top, don't call out." His manner seemed to make the place strike colder to me, but I said no more than, "Very well." "And when you come down tomorrow night, don't call out. Let me ask you a parting question. What made you cry, 'Hello, below there,' tonight?" "Heaven knows," said I. "I cried something to that effect." "Not to that effect, sir. Those were the very words. I know them well." "I admit those were the very words. I said them, no doubt, because I saw you below." "For no other reason?" "What other reason could I possibly have?" You had no feeling that they were conveyed to you in any supernatural way? No. He wished me good night and held up his light. I walked by the side of the down line to rails, by the down line of rails, with a very disagreeable sensation of a train coming behind me, until I found the path. It was easier to mount than to descend, and I got back to my inn without any adventure. Punctual to my appointment, I placed my foot on the first notch of the zigzag next night as the distant clocks were striking 11. He was waiting for me at the bottom with his white light on. "I have not called out," I said, when we came close together. "May I speak now?" "By all means, sir." "Good night, then, and here's my hand." "Good night, sir, and here's mine." With that, we walked side by side to his box, entered it, closed the door, and sat down by the fire. "I have made my mind, sir. Made up my mind, sir," he began, bending forward as soon as we were seated, and speaking in a tone but a little above a whisper. "That you shall not have to ask me twice what troubles me. I took you for someone else yesterday evening. That troubles me." "That mistake?" "No, that's someone else." "Who is it?" "I don't know." "Like me?" "I don't know. I never saw the face. The left arm is across the face and the right arm is waved, violently waved, this way." I followed his action with my eyes, and it was the action of an arm gesticulating with the utmost passion and vehemence. "For God's sake, clear the way." "One moonlight night," said the man, "I was sitting here, when I heard a voice cry, 'Hello, below there!' I started up, looked from the door, and saw this someone else standing by the red light near the tunnel, waving as I just now showed you. The voice seemed hoarse with shouting, and it cried, 'Look out, look out!' and then again, 'Hello, below there, look out!' I caught up my lamp, turned it on red, and ran towards the figure, calling, 'What's wrong? What has happened? Where?' It stood just outside the blackness of the tunnel. I advanced so close upon it that I wondered at its keeping the sleeve across its eyes. I ran right up to it and had my hand stretched out to pull the sleeve away when it was gone." "Into the tunnel?" said I. "No. I ran on into the tunnel, 500 yards. I stopped and held my lamp above my head and saw the figures at the measured distance, and saw the wet stains stealing down the walls and trickling through the arch. I ran out again faster than I had run in, for I had a mortal abhorrence of the place upon me, and I looked all round the red light with my own red light, and I went up the iron ladder to the gallery atop of it, and I came down again and ran back here. I telegraphed both ways. An alarm has been given. Is anything wrong? The answer came back, both ways, all well." Resisting the slow touch of a frozen finger tracing out my spine, I showed him how that this figure must be a deception of his sense of sight, and how that figures originating in disease of the delicate nerves that minister to the functions of the eye were known to have often troubled patients, some of whom had become conscious of the nature of their affliction, and had even proved it by experiments upon themselves. "As to an imaginary cry," said I, "do but listen for a moment to the wind in this unnatural valley, while we speak so low, and to the wild harp it makes of the telegraph wires." "That was all very well," he returned, after we had sat listening for a while, "and he ought to know something of the wind and the wires, he who so often passed long winter nights there, alone and watching." But he would beg to remark that he had not finished. I asked his pardon, and he slowly added these words touching my arm. "Within 6 hours after the appearance, the memorable accident on this line happened, and within 10 hours the dead and wounded were brought along here through the tunnel over the spot where the figure had stood." A disagreeable shudder crept over me, but I did my best against it. It was not to be denied, I rejoined, that this was a remarkable coincidence, calculated deeply to impress his mind. But it was unquestionable that remarkable coincidences did continually occur, and they must be taken into account in dealing with such a subject. Though, to be sure, I must admit, I added, for I thought I saw that he was going to bring the objection to bear upon me, men of common sense did not allow much for coincidences in making the ordinary calculations of life. He again begged to remark that he had not finished. I again begged his pardon for being betrayed into interruptions. "This," he said, again laying his hand upon my arm and glancing over his shoulder with hollow eyes, "was just a year ago. 6 or 7 months passed, and I had recovered from the surprise and shock when, one morning, as the day was breaking, I, standing at the door, looked towards the red light and saw the spectre again." He stopped, with a fixed look at me. "Did it cry out?" "No, it was silent." "Did it wave its arm?" "No. It leaned against the shaft of the light with both hands before the face, like this." Once more I followed his action with my eyes. It was an action of mourning. I have seen such an attitude in stone figures on tombs. "Did you go up to it?" "I came in and sat down, partly to collect my thoughts, partly because it had turned me faint. When I went to the door again, daylight was above, and the ghost was gone." "But nothing followed? Nothing came of this?" He touched me on the arm with his forefinger twice or thrice, giving a ghastly nod each time. "That very day, as a train came out of the tunnel, I noticed at a carriage window on my side what looked like a confusion of hands and heads, and something waved. I saw it just in time to signal the driver, 'Stop!' He shut off and put his brake on, but the train drifted past here 150 yards or more. I ran after it, and as I went along, heard terrible screams and cries. A beautiful young lady had died instantaneously in one of the compartments and was brought in here and laid down on this floor between us." Involuntarily I pushed my chair back, as I looked from the boards at which he pointed to himself. "True, sir, true. Precisely as it happened, so I tell it you." I could think of nothing to say to any purpose, and my mouth was very dry. The wind and the wires took up the story with a long, lamenting wail. He resumed. "Now, sir, mark this, and judge how my mind is troubled. The spectre came back a week ago. Ever since, it has been there, now and again, by fits and starts." "At the light?" "At the danger light." "What does it seem to do?" He repeated, if possible, with increased passion and vehemence, that former gesticulation of, "For God's sake, clear the way!" Then he went on. "I have no peace or rest from it. It calls to me for many minutes together in an agonized manner. 'Below there, look out, look out!' It stands waving to me. It rings my little bell." I caught at that. "Did it ring your bell yesterday evening when I was here and you went to the door?" "Twice." "Why, see," said I, "how your imagination misleads you. My eyes were on the bell and my ears were open to the bell, and if I am a living man, it did not ring at those times. No, nor at any other time, except when it was rung in the natural course of physical things by the station communicating with you." He shook his head. "I have never made a mistake as to that yet, sir. I have never confused the spectre's ring with the man's. The ghost's ring is a strange vibration in the bell that it derives from nothing else, and I have not asserted that the bell stirs to the eye. I don't wonder that you failed to hear it, but I heard it." "And did the spectre seem to be there when you looked out?" "It was there." "Both times?" He repeated firmly, "Both times." "Will you come to the door with me and look through it now?" He bit his underlip as though he was somewhat unwilling, but arose. I opened the door and stood on the step while he stood in the doorway. There was the danger light. There was the dismal mouth of the tunnel. There were the high, wet stone walls of the cutting. There were the stars above them. "Do you see it?" I asked him, taking particular note of his face. His eyes were prominent and strained, but not very much more so, perhaps, than my own had been when I had directed them earnestly toward the same spot. "No," he answered, "it is not there." "Agreed," said I. So we went in again, shut the door, and resumed our seats. I was thinking how best to improve this advantage, if it might be called one, when he took up the conversation in such a matter-of-course way, so assuming that there could be no serious question of fact between us, that I felt myself placed in the weakest of positions. "By this time you will fully understand, sir," he said, "that what troubles me so dreadfully is the question, what does the spectre mean?" I was not sure, I told him, that I did fully understand. "What is it warning against?" he said, ruminating with his eyes on the fire, and only by times turning them on me. "What is the danger? Where is the danger? There is danger overhanging somewhere on the line. Some dreadful calamity will happen. It is not to be doubted this third time after what has gone before. But surely this is a cruel haunting of me. What can I do?" He pulled out his handkerchief and wiped the drops from his heated forehead. "If I telegraph danger on either side of me, or on both, I can give no reason for it," he went on, wiping the palms of his hands. "I should get into trouble and do no good. They would think I was mad. This is the way it would work. Message, danger, take care. Answer, what danger, where? Message, don't know. But for God's sake, take care. They displace me. What else could they do?" His pain of mind was almost pitiable to see. It was the mental torture of a conscientious man, oppressed beyond endurance by an unintelligible responsibility involving life. "When it first stood under the danger light," he went on, putting his dark hair back from his head, and drawing his hands outward across his temples in an extremity of feverish distress, "why not tell me where the accident was to happen, if it must happen? Why not tell me how it could be averted, if it could have been averted? When, on its second coming, it hid its face, why not tell me, instead, she is going to die? Let them keep her at home. If it came on those 2 occasions only to show me that its warnings were true, and so to prepare me for the third, why not warn me plainly now? And I, Lord help me, a mere poor signalman in this solitary station, why not go to somebody with credit to be believed and power to act?" When I saw him in this state, I saw that for the poor man's sake he was, as well as for the public safety, what I had to do for the time was to compose his mind. Therefore, setting aside all question of reality or unreality between us, I represented to him that whoever thoroughly discharged his duty must do well, and that at least it was his comfort that he understood his duty, though he did not understand these confounding appearances. In this effort I succeeded far better than in the attempt to reason him out of his conviction. He became calm. The occupations incidental to his post as the night advanced began to make larger demands on his attention, and I left him at 2 in the morning. I had offered to stay through the night, but he would not hear of it. That I more than once looked back at the red light as I ascended the pathway, that I did not like the red light, and that I should have slept but poorly if my bed had been under it, I see no reason to conceal. Nor did I like the 2 sequences of the accident and the dead girl. I see no reason to conceal that either. But what ran most in my thoughts was the consideration how ought I to act, having become the recipient of the disclosure. I had proved the man to be intelligent, vigilant, painstaking, and exact, but how long might he remain so in his state of mind? Though in a subordinate position, still he held a most important trust, and would I, for instance, like to stake my own life on the chances of his continuing to execute it with precision? Unable to overcome a feeling that there would be something treacherous in my communicating what he had told me to his superiors in the company, without first being plain with himself and proposing a middle course to him, I ultimately resolved to offer to accompany him, otherwise keeping his secret for the present, to the wisest medical practitioner we could hear of in those parts, and to take his opinion. A change in his time of duty would come round next night, he had apprised me, and he would be off an hour or 2 after sunrise, and on again soon after sunset. I had appointed to return accordingly. Next evening was a lovely evening, and I walked out early to enjoy it. The sun was not yet quite down when I traversed the field path near the top of the deep cutting. I would extend my walk for an hour, I said to myself, half an hour on and half an hour back, and it would then be time to go to my signalman's box. Before pursuing my stroll, I stepped to the brink and mechanically looked down from the point of which I had first seen him. I cannot describe the thrill that seized upon me when, close at the mouth of the tunnel, I saw the appearance of a man with his left sleeve across his eyes, passionately waving his right arm. The nameless horror that oppressed me passed in a moment, for in a moment I saw that this appearance of a man was a man indeed, and that there was little group was a little group of other men standing at short distance, to whom he seems to be rehearsing the gesture he made. The danger light was not yet lighted. Against its shaft, a little low hut entirely new to me had been made of some wooden supports and tarpaulin. It looked no bigger than a bed. With an irresistible sense that something was wrong, with a flashing, self-reproachful fear that fatal mischief had come on my leaving the man there, and causing no one to be sent to overlook or correct what he did, I descended the notched path with all the speed I could make. "What is the matter?" I asked the men. "Signalman killed this morning, sir." "Not the man belonging to the box?" "Yes, sir." "Not the man I know?" "You will recognise him, sir, if you knew him," said the man who spoke for the others, solemnly uncovering his own head and raising the end of the tarpaulin, for his face is quite composed. "Oh, how did this happen? How did this happen?" I asked, turning from one to another as the hut closed in again. "He was cut down by an engine, sir. No man in England knew his work better. But somehow he was not clear of the outer rail. It was just at broad day. He had struck the light and had the lamp in his hand. As the engine came out of the tunnel, his back was towards her, and she cut him down. That man drove her, and was showing how it happened. Show the gentleman, Tom." The man, who wore rough dark dress, stepped back to his former place at the mouth of the tunnel. "Coming round the curve of the tunnel, sir," he said. "I saw him at the end, like as if I saw him down a perspective glass. There was no time to check speed, and I knew him to be very careful. As he didn't seem to take heed of the whistle, I shut it off when we were running down upon him, and called out to him as loud as I could." "What did you say?" "I said, 'Below there, look out, look out! For God's sake, clear the way!'" I started. "Oh, it was a dreadful time, sir. I never left off calling to him. I put this arm before my eyes not to see it, and I waved this arm to the last, but it was no use." Without prolonging the narrative to dwell on any one of its curious circumstances more than on any other, I may, in closing it, point out the coincidence that the warning of the engine driver included not only the words which the unfortunate signalman had reported to me as haunting him, but also the words which I myself, not he, had attached, and that only in my own mind, to the gesticulation he had imitated. The end. And that's The Signalman. It is a good story, isn't it? I like that one. I don't think I was paying attention the first time, like when Lucy read it, and I sort of caught bits and pieces, and I did get the gist, but yeah, that's a good one. I like it. Also, hello, welcome, and greetings, Diana. Thank you very much for the resub. It is good to see you. I hope that you are well. Right. It's one story down. Story blast. What do we want next? We have the Body-Snatcher. Oh no, Body-Snatcher is going to be long. Let's not do that. Man-Size and Marble or the Ghost Ship? Story blast. Ghost Ship? Okay. Yeah, let's do Ghost Ship. This is a different story. This is a fun one. If you're not familiar with it, I shan't spoil. Let's just go. I have read it recently, so I should be a little bit up to speed. But I may trip over some bits. Alright, let's go. Also listen out for my kunker voice if you are a Dota player, of which probably none of you are, but here we go. This is The Ghost Ship by Richard Middleton. Fairfield is a little village lying near the Portsmouth Road, about halfway between London and the sea. Strangers who find it by accident now and then call it a pretty old-fashioned place. We who live in it and call it home don't find anything very pretty about it, but we should be sorry to live anywhere else. Our minds have taken the shape of the inn and the church and the green, I suppose. At all events, we never feel comfortable out of Fairfield. Of course, the Cockneys, with their vasty houses and noise-ridden streets, can call us rustics if they choose, but for all that, Fairfield is a better place to live in than London. Doctor says that when he goes to London his mind is bruised with the weight of the houses, and he was a Cockney born. He had to live there himself when he was a little chap, but he knows better now. You gentlemen may laugh. Perhaps some of you come from London way, but it seems to me that a witness like that is worth a gallon of arguments. Dull? Well, you might find it dull, but I assure you that I've listened to all the London yarns you have spun tonight, and they're absolutely nothing to the things that happen at Fairfield. It's because of our way of thinking and minding our own business. If one of your Londoners was set down on the green of a Saturday night when the ghosts of the lads who died in the war keep trysts with the lasses who lie in the churchyard, he couldn't help being curious and interfering, and then the ghost would go somewhere where it was quieter. But we just let them come and go and don't make any fuss, and in consequence Fairfield is the ghostiest place in all of England. Why, I've seen a headless man sitting on the edge of the well in broad daylight, and the children playing about his feet as if he were their father. Take my word for it, spirits know when they are well off as much as human beings. Still, I must admit, the thing that I'm going to tell you about was queer even for our part of the world, where 3 packs of ghost hounds hunt regularly during the season, and Blacksmith's great-grandfather is busy all night shoeing the dead gentleman's horses. Now, that's a thing that wouldn't happen in London, because of their interfering ways, but... where was I? But Blacksmith, he lies up aloft and sleeps as quiet as a lamb. Once, when he had a bad head, he shouted down to them not to make so much noise, and in the morning he found an old guinea left on the anvil as an apology. He wears it on his watch chain now. But I must get on with my story. If I start telling you about all the queer happenings at Fairfield, I'll never stop. It all came of the great storm in the spring of '97, a year that we had 2 great storms. This was the first one, and I remember it very well, because I found in the morning that it had lifted the thatch of my pigsty into the widow's garden as clean as a boy's kite. When I looked over the hedge, widow, Tom Lampert's widow that was prodding for nasturtiums with a daisy grubber. After I had watched her for a little while, I went down to the Fox and Grapes to tell landlord what she had said to me. Landlord, he laughed, being a married man at ease and at ease with the sex. Come to that, he said, the tempest has blown something into my field, the kind of ship I would think it would be. I was surprised at that until he explained that it was only a ghost ship and would do no hurt to the turnips. We argued that it had been blown up from the sea at Portsmouth, and then we talked of something else. There were 2 slates down at Parsonage and a big tree in Lumley's meadow. It was a rare storm. I reckon the wind had blown our ghosts all over England. They were coming back for days afterwards with foundered horses and as footsore as possible, and they were so glad to get back to Fairfield that some of them walked up the street crying like little children. Squire said that his great-grandfather's great-grandfather hadn't looked so dead-beat since the Battle of Nesbit, and he's an educated man. What with one thing and another, I should think it was a week before we got straight again, and then one afternoon I met the landlord on the green, and he had a worried face. I wish you'd come and have a look at that ship in my field, he said to me. Seems to me it's leaning real hard on the turnips. I can't bear thinking what the missus will say when she sees it. I walked down the lane with him, and sure enough there was a ship in the middle of his field, but such a ship as no man has seen on the water for 300 years, let alone in the middle of a turnip field. It was all painted black and covered with carvings, and there was a great bay window in the stern for all the world like the squire's drawing room. There was a crowd of little black cannon on deck and looking out of her portholes, and she was anchored at each end to the hard ground. I have seen wonders of the world on picture postcards, but I have never seen anything equal to that. She seems very solid for a ghost ship, I said, seeing the landlord was bothered. I should say it's a betwixt and between, he answered, puzzling it over. But it's going to spoil a matter of 50 turnips, and missus, she'll want it moved. We went up to her and touched the side, and it was as hard as a real ship. Now, there's folks in England would call that very curious, he said. Now, I don't know much about ships, but I should think that ghost ship weighed a solid 200 ton, and it seemed to me that she had come to stay, so that I felt sorry for the landlord, who was a married man. All the horses in Fairfield won't move her out of my turnips, he said, frowning at her. Just then, we heard a noise on her deck, and we looked up and saw that a man had come out of her front cabin and was looking down at us very peaceably. He was dressed in a black uniform set out with rusty gold lace, and he had a great cutlass by his side in a brass sheath. "I'm Captain Bartholomew Roberts," he said in a gentleman's voice. "Put in for recruits. I seem to have brought her rather far up the harbour." "Harbour?" cried landlord. "Why, you're 50 miles from the sea." Captain Roberts didn't turn a hair. "So much as that, is it?" he said coolly. "Well, it's of no consequence." Landlord was a bit upset at this. "I don't want to be unneighbourly," he said, "but I wish you hadn't brought your ship into my field. You see, my wife sets great store in these turnips." The captain took a pinch of snuff out of his fine gold box that he pulled out of his pocket and dusted his fingers with a silk handkerchief in a very genteel fashion. "I'm only here for a few months," he said, "but if a testimony of my esteem would pacify your good lady, I should be content." And with the words he loosed a great gold brooch from the neck of his coat and tossed it down to the landlord. Landlord blushed as red as a strawberry. I'm not denying she's fond of jewellery," he said, "but it's too much for half a sackful of turnips." And indeed it was a handsome brooch. The captain laughed. "Tut, man," he said, "it's a forced sale, and you deserve a good price. Say no more about it." And nodding good day to us, he turned on his heel and went into the cabin. Landlord walked back up the lane like a man with a weight off his mind. "That tempest has blown me a bit of luck," he said. "And missus will be much pleased with that brooch. It's better than blacksmith's guinea any day." 97 was Jubilee year, the year of the second Jubilee, you remember, and we had great doings at Fairfield, so that we hadn't much time to bother about the ghost ship, though anyhow it isn't our way to meddle in things that don't concern us. Landlord, he saw his tenant once or twice when he was hoeing his turnips and passed the time of day, and landlord's wife wore a new brooch to church every Sunday. But we didn't mix much with the ghosts at any time. All except an idiot lad there was in the village, and he didn't know the difference between a man and a ghost, poor innocent. On Jubilee Day, however, somebody told Captain Roberts while the church bells were ringing, and he hoisted a flag and fired off his guns like a loyal Englishman. 'Tis true the guns were shotted, and one of the round shot knocked a hole in Farmer Johnston's barn, but nobody thought much of that in such a season of rejoicing. It wasn't till our celebrations were over that we noticed that anything was wrong in Fairfield. 'Twas Shoemaker who first told me about it one morning at the Fox and Grapes. "You know my great-uncle?" he said to me. "You mean Joshua, the quiet lad?" I answered, knowing him well. "Quiet?" said Shoemaker indignantly. "Quiet, you call him, coming home at 3 o'clock every morning as drunk as a magistrate and waking up the whole house with his noise?" "Why, it can't be Joshua," I said, for I knew him for one of the most respectable young ghosts in the village. "Joshua it is," says Shoemaker, "and one of those nights he'll find himself out in the street if he ain't careful." This kind of talk shocked me, I can tell you, for I don't like to hear a man abusing his own family, and I could hardly believe that a steady youngster like Joshua had taken a drink. But just then in came Butcher Orwin in such a temper that he could hardly drink his beer. The young puppy! The young puppy!" he kept saying, and it was some time before Shoemaker and I found that he was talking about his ancestor that fell at Senlac. "Drink?" said Shoemaker hopefully, for we all like company in this and our misfortune, and Butcher nodded grimly. "The young noodle," he said, emptying his tankard. Well, after that I kept my ears open, and it was the same story all over the village. There was hardly a young man among all the ghosts in Fairfield who didn't roll home in the small hours in the morning, the worse for liquor. I used to wake up in the night and hear them stumble past my house, singing outrageous songs. The worst of it was that we couldn't keep the scandal to ourselves, and the folk at Greenall began to talk of sodden Fairfield, and taught their children to sing a song about us. Sodden Fairfield, has no use for bread and butter, rum for breakfast, rum for dinner, rum for tea, and rum for supper. We're easy going in our village, but we don't like that. Of course, we soon found out where the young fellows went to get the drink, and landlord was terribly cut up that his tenant should have turned out so badly, but his wife wouldn't hear of parting with the brooch, so that he couldn't give the captain notice to quit. But as time went on, things grew from bad to worse, and at all hours of the day you would see those young reprobates sleeping it off on the village green. Nearly every afternoon a ghost wagon used to jolt down to the ship with a lading of rum, and though the older ghosts seemed inclined to give the captain's hospitality the go-by, the youngsters were neither to hold nor to bind. So one afternoon when I was taking my nap, I heard a knock at the door, and there was Parson looking very serious, like a man with a job before him that he didn't altogether relish. "I'm going down to talk to the captain about all this drunkenness in the village, and I want you to come with me," he said straight out. Can't say that I fancied the visit much myself, and I tried to hint to Parson that as, after all, there were only a lot of ghosts, it didn't very much matter. "Dead or alive, I'm responsible for the good conduct," he said, "and I'm going to do my duty to put a stop to this continued disorder, and you are coming with me, John Simmons." So I went, Parson being a persuasive kind of man. We went down to the ship, and as we approached her, I could see the captain tasting the air on deck. When he saw our parson, he took off his hat he took off his hat very politely, and I can tell you that I was relieved to find he had a proper respect for the cloth. Parson acknowledged his salute and spoke out stoutly enough, "Sir, I should be glad to have a word with you." "Come on board, sir, come on board," said the captain, and I could tell by his voice that he knew why we were there. Parson and I climbed up an uneasy kind of ladder, and the captain took us into the great cabin at the back of the ship, where the bay window was. It was the most wonderful place you ever saw in your life, all full of gold and silver plate, swords with jewelled scabbards, carved oak chairs, and great chests that looked as though they were bursting with guineas. Even Parson was surprised, and he did not shake his head very hard when the captain took down some silver cups and poured us out a drink of rum. I tasted mine, and I don't mind saying that it changed my view of things entirely. There was nothing betwixt and between about that rum, and I felt that it was ridiculous to blame the lads for drinking too much of the stuff like that. It seemed to fill my veins with honey and fire. Parson put the case squarely to the captain, but I didn't listen much to what he said. I was busy sipping my drink and looking through the window at the fishes swimming to and fro over landlord's turnips. Just then it seemed the most natural thing in the world that they should be there, though afterwards, of course, I could see that was what proved it was a ghost ship. But even then I thought it was queer when I saw a drowned sailor float by in the thin air with his hair and beard all full of bubbles. It was the first time I had seen anything quite like that at Fairfield. All the time I was regarding the wonders of the deep, Parson was telling Captain Roberts how there was no peace or rest in the village owing to the curse of drunkenness, and what a bad example the youngsters were setting to the older ghosts. The captain listened very attentively, and only put in a word now and then about boys being boys and young men sowing their wild oats. But when Parson had finished his speech, he filled up our silver cups and said to Parson with a flourish, "I should be sorry to cause trouble anywhere where I have been made welcome, and you will be glad to hear that I put to sea tomorrow night. And now you must drink me a prosperous voyage." So we all stood up and drank the toast with honour, and that noble rum was like hot oil in my veins. After that, Captain showed us some of the curiosities he had brought back from foreign parts, and we were greatly amazed, though afterwards I couldn't clearly remember what they were. And then I found myself walking across the turnips with Parson, and I was telling him of the glories of the deep that I had seen through the window of the ship. He turned on me severely. "If I were you, John Simmons," he said, "I should go straight home to bed." He has a way of putting the things that wouldn't occur to an ordinary man, and as Parson, and I did as he told me. Well, next day it came on to blow, and it blew harder and harder, till about 8 o'clock at night I heard a noise and looked out into the garden. I dare say you won't believe me, it seems a bit tall even to me, but the wind had lifted the thatch off my pigsty into the widow's garden a second time. I thought I wouldn't wait to hear what widow had to say about it, so I went across the green to the Fox and Grapes, and the wind was so strong that I danced along on tiptoe like a girl at the fair. When I got to the inn, landlord had to help me shut the door. It seemed as though a dozen goats were pushing against it to come in out of the storm. "It's a powerful tempest," he said, drawing the beer. "I hear there's a chimney down at Dickory End." "It's a funny thing how do sailors know about the weather," I muttered. I answered, "When Captain said he was going tonight, I was thinking it would take a capful of wind to carry the ship back to sea, but no, it was more than a capful." "Ah, yes," said landlord. "It's tonight he goes, true enough, and mind you, though he treated me handsome over the rent, I'm not sure it's a loss to the village. I don't hold with gentries who fetch their drink from London instead of helping the local traders to get their living." "But you haven't got any rum like this, like his," I said, to draw him out. His neck grew red above his collar, and I was afraid I'd gone too far, but after a while he got his breath with a grunt. "John Simmons," he said, "if you come down here this windy night to talk a lot of fool's talk, you've wasted a journey." Well, of course, then I had to smooth him down with praising his rum, and heaven forgive me for swearing it was better than Captain's. For the like of that rum no living lips have tasted save mine and Parson's, but somehow or other I brought the landlord round, and presently we must have a glass of his best to prove its quality. "Beat that if you can," he cried, and we both raised our glasses to our mouths, only to stop halfway and look at each other in amaze. For the wind that had been howling outside like an outrageous dog had all of a sudden turned as melodious as the carol boys of a Christmas Eve. "Surely that's not my Martha," whispered landlord, Martha being his great-aunt that lived in the loft overhead. We went to the door and the wind burst it open so that the handle was driven clean into the plaster of the wall, but we didn't think about that at the time, for over our heads, sailing very comfortably through the windy stars, was the ship that had passed the summer in landlord's field. Her portholes and her bay window were blazing with lights, and there was a noise of singing and fiddling on her decks. "He's gone," shouted landlord above the storm, "and he's taken half the village with him." I could only nod and answer, not having lungs like bellows of leather. In the morning, we were able to measure the strength of the storm, and over and above my pigsty there was damage enough wrought in the village to keep us busy. True it is that the children had to break down no branches for the firing that autumn, since the wind had strewn the woods with more than they could carry away. Many of our ghosts were scattered abroad, but this time very few came back, all the young men having sailed with the captain. And not only ghosts, for a poor half-witted lad was missing, and we reckoned that he had stowed himself away, or perhaps shipped as cabin boy, not knowing any better. What with the lamentations of the ghost girls and the grumbling of families who had lost an ancestor, the village was upset for a while, and the funny thing was that it was the folk who had complained most of the carryings on of the youngsters who made most noise now that they were gone. I hadn't any sympathy with shoemaker or butcher who ran about saying how much they missed their lads, but it made me grieve to hear the poor bereaved girls calling their lovers by name on the village green at nightfall. It didn't seem fair to me that they should have lost their men a second time after giving up life in order to join them, as like as not. Still, not even a spirit can be sorry forever, and after a few months we made up our mind that the folk who had sailed in the ship were never coming back, and we didn't talk about it any more. And then, one day, I dare say it would be a couple of years after, when the whole business was quite forgotten, who should come traipsing along the road from Portsmouth but the daft lad who had gone away with the ship, without waiting till he was dead to become a ghost. You never saw such a boy as that in all your life. He had a great rusty cutlass hanging to a string at his waist, and he was tattooed all over in fine colours, so that even his face looked like a girl's sampler. He had a handkerchief in his hand full of foreign shells and old-fashioned pieces of small money, very curious, and he walked up to the well outside his mother's house and drew himself a drink as if he had been nowhere in particular. The worst of it was that he had come back as soft-headed as he went, and try as we might, we couldn't get anything reasonable out of him. He talked a lot of gibberish about keel-hauling and walking the plank, and crimes and murders, things which a decent sailor should know nothing about, so that it seemed to me that for all his manners, Captain had been more of a pirate than a gentleman mariner. But to draw sense out of that boy was as hard as picking cherries off a crab tree. One silly tale he had that he kept drifting back to, and to hear him you would have thought that it was the only thing that happened to him in his life. We was at anchor, he would say, off an island called the Basket of Flowers, and the sailor had caught a lot of parrots, and we were teaching them to swear, up and down the decks, and the language they used was dreadful. And we looked up and saw the mast of the Spanish ship outside the harbour. Outside the harbour they were, so we threw the parrots into the sea and sailed out to fight. And all the parrots were drowned in the sea, and the language they used was dreadful. That's the sort of boy he was, nothing but silly talk of parrots, when we asked him about the fighting. And we never had a chance of teaching him better for 2 days after he ran away again and hasn't been seen since. That's my story, and I assure you that things like that are happening at Fairfield all the time. The ship has never come back, but somehow, as people grow older, they seem to think that one of these windy nights she'll come sailing in over the hedges with all the lost ghosts on board. Well, when she comes, she'll be welcome. There's one ghost lass that has never grown tired of waiting for a lad to return. Every night you'll see her out on the green, straining her poor eyes with looking for the mast lights among the stars. A faithful lass, you'd call her, and I'm thinking you'd be right. Landlord's field wasn't a penny for the worse for the visit, but they do say that since then the turnips that have been grown in it have tasted of rum. And that's the story of the ghost ship. And before we go to a break, yes, I'm aware that my accent shifted for the narrator. Once it went, I couldn't get it back. And I realised, oh no, it's gone. From sort of faux cockney to kind of country bumpkin. Yeah, but enough of that. Rum turnips. Right, what you do is you hollow out the turnip and you use that to make rum. It's just pop a straw in, boom, done. Off you go. Yeah, I like that story. It reminds me, there's kind of an older inspiration for this channel. There's like, I used to listen to storybooks as a kid. It was, you know, they were like tapes with celebrities and others. There's one that like had Glenda Jackson reading stories on it and stuff. And the stories of all sorts of different things. And the one that I always remember was the tale of this, I think it was a caravan that had like wallpaper on it with it was like, yeah, wallpaper on this caravan that had little like tropical islands on it, and there's like a character called Captain Spigot, who I think lived in this caravan and would tell tales that, like, on a certain night of the year when the moon was just so you could see the trees on this tropical island blowing in the breeze and stuff, and he, in the end, he disappears into the wallpaper and lives out the rest of his life on this tropical island. And this story always reminds me of that. It has that same kind of, you know, just sort of whimsical, nice tone, really. I don't know, yeah. Actually reminds you of the Ghosts of Clawstone Castle. I do not know that one. Yeah, exactly. And ghosts don't need to be scary and dangerous creatures. Yeah, like I just love that it's like we're a sort of, yeah, we're a quaint, cute, whimsical, very rural village, and we just kind of chill with our ghosts. And it has, in the opening paragraph, where he's talking about Fairfield and comparing it to like London and stuff. Yeah, that's just a line that I really, really love. That's well, the preamp. But okay, just reading the start. Fairfield is a little village lying near the Portsmouth Road, about halfway between London and the sea. Strangers who find it by accident now and then call it a pretty old-fashioned place. We who live in it call it home and don't find anything very pretty about it, but we should be sorry to live anywhere else. The bit that I love: our minds have taken the shape of the inn and the church in the green, I suppose. I just think that's a really lovely phrase. At all events, we never feel comfortable out of Fairfield. It's just, yeah, I love that. I love that way of putting it. But yes, we are going to go to a break, because a break is needed. I need to like move around a little bit and drink some water. You want a whole series of stories about this town? Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think many of the other stories in this book by the same author have the same kind of whimsical feel. All the weird, yeah, like, yeah, that's the thing. It's I like that setting up as like, we've got 1,000 of these things. This is just one of them. It just, yeah, it creates a nice atmosphere. But yeah, Richard Middleton is the author. It's from The Ghost Ship and Other Stories. But yeah, as I say, the rest of his stuff that I've read, at least from this book, seems a lot more sad and kind of depressing. I think he probably did have some kinds of battles with depression himself. So, you know, it stands to reason. But yeah, I should read some more of his things from here, just for myself, to actually see what else works. But yeah, we're going to go to a break, and I will see you back here in about 5 minutes or so. There's a loud helicopter going over. That's cool. That's great. Yeah, see you back here in about 5 minutes. You know those things to do. Get tea, have piss. No, that's Dave's thing. You know, stretch, cycle those fluids, stretch those limbs, and see you back here in a minute. Bye for now. we're back. Hello. Joey was in the room, has left the room, and will surely come back to interrupt at some point very soon. But yes, hello everyone. Welcome back from the break. If you are filtering back in and haven't, like me, just stepped out for a second and came back and have been here most of the time. It is warm in my room because of Cat. I have to keep the window shut, and it's not great. But yeah, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. It's nice going back to some of the old ones, and I feel like we've got a good excuse, because I think certainly from my end, the audio quality for some of those was not very good, and probably even the reading quality as well. As in I think I'm so much better than I was, but I think I've definitely learned a few things in doing this now for a couple of years that I just feel like in general I've improved a bit, and yeah, it's nice to go back and put a bit of spit shine on them. No, I mean, you always miss coming back too busy petting the dog. I mean, that is a noble vocation. So yeah, I hope the pets are being well petted. I like give the pets a scritch. There we go. Let's cover that one. And what I was going to say something else. Oh yeah, the craft along. I hope the craft alongs are going well as well. If you're sat making a thing, I hope it's good. I hope you're enjoying, and this is providing a nice background to it. But if we're going to get through all the stories, we've got to make a start. I really don't know that we're going to have time for the Body-Snatcher, but let's see. I'm going to do Man-Size in Marble next, because it's good. I mean, they're all good. They're all good stories, Bront. And let's crack on. Hang on. Can I'm pretty sure I just heard him at the door. One sec. Nope, it was a ghost. But he'll do that anyway. As soon as I start, there will be a cat interruption. But exactly, spooky ghost cat. Let us get on to the next story. This is another Year 1 classic. I think it was Year 1. Must have been. And it is by Edith Nesbit, who I've been writing with 2 T's, but it's 1 T. And the story is called Man-Size in Marble. Although every word of this story is as true as despair, I do not expect people to believe it. Nowadays, a rational explanation is required before belief is possible. Let me, then, at once offer the rational explanation which finds most favour among those who have heard the tale of my life's tragedy. It is held that we were under a delusion, Laura and I, on that 31st of October, and that this supposition places the whole matter on a satisfactory and believable basis. The reader can judge, when he, too, has heard my story, how far this is an explanation, and in what sense it is rational. There were 3 who took part in this, Laura and I and another man. The other man still lives and can speak to the truth of the least credible part of my story. I never in my life knew what it was to have as much money as I required to supply the most ordinary needs. Good colours, books, and cab fares, and when we were married we quite knew well that we should only be able to live at all by strict punctuality and attention to business. I used to paint in those days, and Laura used to write, and we felt sure we could keep the pot at least simmering. Living in town was out of the question, so we went to look for a cottage in the country, which should be at once sanitary and picturesque. So rarely do these 2 qualities meet in one cottage that our search was for some time quite fruitless. But when we got away from friends and house agents on our honeymoon, our wits grew clear again, and we knew a pretty cottage when at last we saw one. It was at Brenzett, a little village set on a hill over against the southern marshes. We had gone there from the seaside village where we were staying to see the church, and 2 fields from the church we found this cottage. It stood quite by itself, about 2 miles from the village. It was a long, low building with rooms sticking out in unexpected places. There was a bit of stonework, ivy-covered and moss-grown, just 2 old rooms, all that was left of a big house that had once stood there. And round this stonework the house had grown up. Stripped of its roses and jasmine, it would have been hideous. As it stood, it was charming, and after a brief examination, we took it. It was absurdly cheap. There was a jolly, old-fashioned garden with grass paths and no end of hollyhocks and sunflowers and big lilies. From the window you could see the marsh pastures, and beyond them the blue, thin line of the sea. We got a tall old peasant woman to do for us. Her face and figure were good, though her cooking was of the homeliest, but she understood all about gardening, and told us all the old names of the coppices and cornfields, and the stories of the smugglers and highwaymen, and, better still, of the things that walks and the sights which met one in lonely glens of a starlight night. We soon came to leave all the domestic business to Mrs. Dorman, and to use her legends in little magazine stories which brought in a jingling guinea. We had 3 months of married happiness, and did not have a single quarrel. One October evening I had been down to smoke a pipe with the doctor, our only neighbour, a pleasant young Irishman. Laura had stayed at home to finish a comic sketch. I left her laughing over her own jokes, and came in to find her a crumpled heap of pale muslin weeping on the window-seat. "Good heavens, my darling, what's the matter?" I cried, taking her in my arms. "What is the matter? Do speak." "It's Mrs. Dorman," she sobbed. "What has she done?" I inquired, immensely relieved. "She says she must go before the end of the month, and she says her niece is ill. She's gone down to see her now, but I don't believe that's the reason, because her niece is always ill. I believe someone has been setting her against us. Her manner was so queer." "Never mind," I said. "Whatever you do, don't cry, or I shall have to cry to keep you in countenance, and then you'll never respect your man again." "But you see—" Excuse me. That's Joey crying at the door. 1 second. For those of you reading along, he was summoned by the book. "But you see," she went on, it is really serious, because these village people are so sheepy, and if one won't do a thing, you may be quite sure none of the others will. And I shall have to cook the dinners and wash up the hateful greasy plates, and you'll have to carry cans of water about and clean the boots and knives, and we shall never have any time for work or earn any money or anything." I represented to her that even if we had to perform these duties, the day would still present some margin for other toils and recreations, but she refused to see the matter in any but the greyest light. "I'll speak to Mrs. Dorman when she comes back, and see if I can't come to terms with her," I said. "Perhaps she wants a rise in her screw. It will be all right. Let's walk up to the church." The church was a large and lonely one, and we loved to go there, especially upon bright nights. The path skirted a wood, cut through at once, and ran along the crest of the hill through 2 meadows and round the churchyard wall, over which the old yews loomed in black masses of shadow. This path, which was partly paved, was called the Bier Walk, for it had long been the way by which the corpses had been carried to burial. The churchyard was richly treed, and was shaded by great elms which stood just outside and stretched their majestic arms in benediction of the happy dead. A large, low porch let one into the building by a Norman doorway and a heavy oak door studded with iron. Inside, the arches rose into darkness, and between them the reticulated windows which stood out white in the moonlight. In the chancel, the windows were of rich glass, which showed in faint light their noble colouring, and made the black oak of the choir pews hardly more solid than the shadows. But on each side of the altar lay a grey marble figure of a knight in full plate armour lying upon a low slab, with hands held up in everlasting prayer, and these figures, oddly enough, were always to be seen if there was any glimmer of light in the church. Their names were lost, but the peasants told of them that they had been fierce and wicked men, marauders by land and sea, who had been the scourge of their time and had been guilty of deeds so foul that the house they had lived in, the big house, by the way, that had stood on the site of our cottage, had been stricken by lightning and the vengeance of heaven. But for all that, the gold of their heirs had bought them a place in the church. Looking at the bad, hard faces reproduced in the marble, this story was easily believed. The church looked at its best and weirdest on that night, for the shadows of the yew tree fell through the windows upon the floor of the nave and touched the pillars with tattered shade. We sat down together without speaking and watched the solemn beauty of the old church with some of that awe which inspired its early builders. We walked to the chancel and looked at the sleeping warriors. Then we rested some time on the stone seat in the porch, looking out over the stretch of quiet moonlit meadows, feeling in every fibre of our being the peace of the night and of our happy love, and came away at last with a sense that even scrubbing and blackleading were but small troubles at their worst. Mrs. Dorman had come back from the village, and I at once invited her to a tete-a-tete. "Now, Mrs. Dorman," I said when I had got her into my painting room, "what's all this about your not staying with us?" "I should be glad to get away, sir, before the end of the month," she answered with her usual placid dignity. "Have you any fault to find, Mrs. Dorman?" "None at all, sir. You and your lady have always been most kind, I'm sure." "Well, what is it? Are your wages not high enough?" "No, sir, I guess quite enough." "Then why not stay?" "I'd rather not," with some hesitation. "My niece is ill." "But your niece has been ill ever since we came. Can't you stay for another month?" "No, sir, I'm bound to go by Thursday." And this was Monday. "Well, I must say, I think you might have let us know before. There's no time now to get anyone else, and your mistress is not fit to do heavy housework. Can't you stay till next week?" "I might be able to come back next week." "But why must you go this week?" I persisted. "Come, out with it." Mrs. Dorman drew a little shawl which she always wore tightly across her bosom, as though she were cold. Then she said, with a sort of effort, "They say, sir, as this was a big house in Catholic times, that there were many deeds done here." The nature of the deeds might be vaguely inferred from the inflection of Mrs. Dorman's voice, which was enough to make one's blood run cold. I was glad that Laura was not in the room. She was always nervous, as highly strung natures are, and I felt that these tales about our house, told by this old peasant woman, with her impressive manner and contagious credulity, might have made our home less dear to my wife. "Tell me about it, Mrs. Dorman," I said. "You needn't mind about telling me. I'm not like young people who make fun of such things." Which was partly true. "Well, sir," she sank her voice, "you may have seen in the church beside the altar 2 shapes." "You mean the effigies of the knights in armour?" I said cheerfully. "I mean them 2 bodies, drawed out man-size in marble." She returned, and I had to admit that her description was 1,000 times more graphic than mine, to say nothing of a certain weird force and uncanniness about the phrase, "drawed out man-size in marble." "They do say, as on All Saints' Eve, them 2 bodies sits up on their slabs and gets off them and then walks down the aisle in their marble." Another good phrase, Mrs. Dorman. "And as the church clock strikes 11, they walks out the church door and over the graves and along the bier walk, and if it's wet night, there's the marks of their feet in the morning." "Where do they go?" I asked, rather fascinated. "They comes back here to their homes, sir, and if anyone meets them—" "Well, what then?" I asked. But no, not another word could I get from her, save that her niece was ill and she must go. "Whatever you do, sir, lock the door early on All Saints' Eve and make the cross sign over the doorstep and on the windows." "But has anyone ever seen these things?" I persisted. "Who was here last year?" "No one, sir. The lady as owned the house only stayed here in summer, and she always went to London a full month before the night. And I'm sorry to inconvenience you and the lady, but my niece is ill and I must go on Thursday." I could have shaken her for her absurd reiteration of that obvious fiction after she had told me her real reasons. I did not tell Laura the legend of the shapes that walked in their marble, partly because a legend concerning our house might perhaps trouble my wife, and partly, I think, from some more occult reason. This was not quite the same to me as any other story, and I did not want to talk about it till the day it was over. I had very soon ceased to think of the legend, however. I was painting a portrait of Laura against the lattice window, and I could not think of much else. I had got a splendid background of yellow and grey sunset, and was working away with enthusiasm at her face. On Thursday, Mrs. Dorman went. She relented at parting so far as to say, "Don't put yourself about too much, ma'am, and if there's any little thing I can do next week, I'm sure I shan't mind." Thursday passed off pretty well. Friday came. It is about what happened on that Friday that this is written. I got up early, I remember, and lighted the kitchen fire, and had just achieved a smoky success when my little wife came running down as sunny and sweet as the clear October morning itself. We prepared breakfast together and found it very good fun. The housework was soon done, and when brushes and brooms and pails were quiet again, the house was still indeed. It is wonderful what a difference one makes in a house. We really missed Mrs. Dorman, quite apart from considerations concerning pots and pans. We spent the day in dusting our books and putting them straight, and dined gaily on cold steak and coffee. Laura was, if possible, brighter and gayer and sweeter than usual, and I began to think that a little domestic toil was really good for her. We had never been so merry since we were married, and the walk we had that afternoon was, I think, the happiest time of all my life. When we had watched the deep scarlet clouds slowly pale into leaden grey against a pale green sky, and saw the white mists curl up along the hedgerows in the distant marsh, we came back to the house hand in hand. "You are sad, my darling," I said, half jestingly, as we sat down together in our little parlour. I expected... Excuse me one sec. I just needed a cough. I expected a disclaimer, for my own silence had been the silence of complete happiness. To my surprise, she said, "Yes, I think I am sad, or rather I am uneasy. I don't think I'm very well. I have shivered 3 or 4 times since we came in, and it is not cold, is it?" "No," I said, and hoped it was not a chill caught from the treacherous mists that roll up from the marshes in the dying night. "No," she said, she did not think so. Then, after a silence, she spoke suddenly. "Do you ever have presentiments of evil?" "No," I said, smiling, "and I shouldn't believe in them if I had." "I do," she went on. "The night my father died, I knew it, though he was right away in the north of Scotland." I did not answer in words. She sat looking at the fire for some time in silence, gently stroking my hand. At last she sprang up, came behind me, and, drawing my head back, kissed me. "There, it's over now," she said. "What a baby I am! Come, light the candles and we'll have some of these new Rubinstein duets." And we spent a happy hour or 2 at the piano. At about 10:30 I began to long for the good-night pipe, but Laura looked so white that I felt it would be brutal of me to fill our sitting-room with the fumes of strong Cavendish. "I'll take my pipe outside," I said. "Let me come too." "No, sweetheart, not tonight. You're much too tired. I shan't be long. Go to bed, or I shall have an invalid to nurse tomorrow as well as the boots to clean." I kissed her and was turning to go, and she flung her arms round my neck and held me as if she would never let me go. I stroked her again. I stroked her hair. "Come, my dear, you're overtired. The housework has been too much for you." She loosened her clasp a little and drew a deep breath. "No, we've been very happy today, Jack, haven't we? Don't stay out too long." "I won't, my dearie." I strolled out of that front door, leaving it unlatched. What a night it was! The jagged masses of heavy dark cloud were rolling at intervals from horizon to horizon, and thin white wreaths covered the stars. Through all the rush of the cloud river the moon swam, breasting the waves and disappearing again in the darkness. I walked up and down, drinking in the beauty of the quiet earth and the changing sky. The night was absolutely silent. Nothing seemed to be abroad. There was no scurrying of rabbits or twitter of the half-asleep birds. And though the clouds went sailing across the sky, the wind that drove them never came low enough to rustle the dead leaves in the woodland paths. Across the meadows I could see the church tower standing out black and grey against the sky. I walked there, thinking over our 3 months of happiness. I heard a bell beat from the church. 11 already. I turned to go in, but the night held me. I could not go back into our little warm rooms yet. I would go up to the church. I looked at the low window as I went by. Laura was lying on her chair in front of the fire. I could not see her face, only her little head showed, dark against the pale blue wall. She was quite still, asleep, no doubt. I walked slowly along the edge of the wood. A sound broke the stillness of the night. It was a rustling in the wood. I stopped and listened. The sound stopped too. I went on, and now distinctly heard another step than mine answer mine like an echo. It was a poacher or a wood-stealer most likely, for these were not unknown in our Arcadian neighbourhood. But whoever it was, he was a fool not to step more lightly. I turned into the wood, and now the footsteps seemed to come from the path I had just left. It must be an echo, I thought. The wood looked perfect in the moonlight. The large dying ferns and the brushwood showed where the thorough thinning foliage the pale light came down. The tree trunks stood like Gothic columns all around me. They reminded me of the church, and I turned into the bier walk and passed through the corpse gate between the graves to the low porch. I paused for a moment on the stone seat where Laura and I had watched the fading landscape. Then I noticed that the door of the church was open, and I blamed myself for having left it unlatched the other night. We were the only people who ever cared to come to the church except on Sundays, and I was vexed to think that through our carelessness the damp autumn airs had had a chance of getting in and injuring the old fabric. I went in. It will seem strange, perhaps, that I should have gone halfway up the aisle before I remembered, with a sudden chill, followed by a sudden rush of self-contempt, that this was the very day and hour when, according to tradition, the shapes drawn out, man-size in marble, began to walk. Having thus remembered the legend, and remembered it with a shiver of which I was ashamed, I could not do otherwise than walk up towards the altar, just to look at the figures. As I said to myself, really what I wanted was to assure myself, first, that I did not believe the legend, and secondly, that it was not true. I was rather glad that I had come. I thought now I could tell Mrs. Dornan how vain her fancies were, and how peacefully the marble figures slept on through the ghastly hour. With my hands in my pockets, I passed up the aisle. In the grey, dim light, the eastern end of the church looked larger than usual, and the arches above the two tombs looked larger too. The moon came out and showed me the reason. I stopped short. My heart gave a leap that nearly choked me and then sank sickeningly. The bodies, drawn out man-size, were gone, and their marble slabs lay wide and bare in the vague moonlight that slanted through the east window. Were they really gone, or was I mad? Clenching my nerves, I stooped and passed my hand over the smooth slabs and felt their flat, unbroken surface. Had someone taken the things away? Was it some vile practical joke? I would make sure, anyway. In an instant I had made a torch of a newspaper which happened to be in my pocket, and, lighting it, held it high above my head. Its yellow glare illumined the dark arches and those slabs. The figures were gone, and I was alone in the church. Or was I alone? And then a horror seized me, a horror indefinable and indescribable, an overwhelming certainty of supreme and accomplished calamity. I flung down the torch, and tore along the aisle and out through the porch, biting my lips as I ran to keep myself from shrieking aloud. Oh, was I mad? Or what was this that possessed me? I leaped the churchyard wall and took the straight cut across the fields, led by the light from the windows. Just as I got over the first stile, a dark figure seemed to spring out of the ground. Mad still with that certainty of misfortune, I made for the thing that stood in my path, shouting, "Get out of the way, can't you?" But my push met with a more vigorous resistance than I had expected. My arms were caught just above the elbow, and held as in a vice, and the raw-boned Irish doctor actually shook me. "Let me go, you fool!" I gasped. "The marble figures have gone from the church. I tell you they've gone." He broke into a ringing laugh. "I'll have to give you a draught tomorrow, I see. You've been smoking too much and listening to old wives' tales. I tell you, I've seen the bare slabs. Well, come back with me. I'm going up to old Palmer's. His daughter's ill. We'll look in at the church and let me see the bare slabs." "You go, if you like," I said, a little less frantic for his laughter. "I'm going home to my wife." "Rubbish, man," said he. "Do you think I'll permit that? Are you to go saying all your life that you seem solid marble endowed with vitality, and me to go all my life saying you were a coward? No, sir, you shan't do it." The night air, a human voice, and I think also the physical contact with this 6 feet of solid common sense brought me back a little to my ordinary self, and the word coward was a mental shower bath. "Come on then," I said sullenly. "Perhaps you're right." He still held my arm tightly. We got over the stile and back to the church. All was still as death. The place smelt very damp and earthy. We walked up the aisle. I am not ashamed to confess that I shut my eyes. I knew the figures would not be there. I heard Kelly strike a match. "Here they are, you see, right enough. You've been dreaming or drinking, asking your pardon for the imputation." I opened my eyes. By Kelly's expiring vesta I saw 2 shapes lying in their marble on the slabs. I drew a deep breath. "I'm awfully indebted to you," I said. "It must have been some trick of the light, or I have been working rather hard. Perhaps that's it." I was quite convinced they were gone. "I'm aware of that," he answered rather grimly. "You'll have to be careful of that brain of yours, my friend, I assure you." He was leaning over and looking at the right-hand figure whose stony face was the most villainous and deadly in expression. "By Jove," he said, "something has been afoot here. The hand is broken." And so it was. I was certain that it had been perfect the last time Laura and I had been there. "Perhaps someone has tried to remove them," said the young doctor. "Come along," I said, "or my wife will be getting anxious. You'll come in and have a drop of whiskey and drink confusion to ghosts and better sense to me." "I ought to go up to Palmer's, but it's so late now I'd best leave it till the morning," he replied. I think he fancied I needed him more than did Palmer's girl, so, discussing how such an illusion could have been possible and deducing from this experience large generalities concerning ghostly apparitions, we walked up to our cottage. We saw, as we walked up the garden path, that bright light streamed out of the front door, and presently saw that the parlour door was open too. Had she gone out? "Come in," I said, and Dr. Kelly followed me into the parlour. It was all ablaze with candles, not only the wax ones, but at least a dozen guttering, glaring tallow dips, stuck in vases and ornaments in unlikely places. Light, I knew, was Laura's remedy for nervousness. Poor child, why had I left her? Brute that I was. We glanced round the room, and at first we did not see her. The window was open, and the draught set all the candles flaring one way. Her chair was empty, and her handkerchief and book lay on the floor. I turned to the window. There, in the recess of the window, I saw her. Oh, my child, my love, had she gone to that window to watch for me? And what had come into the room behind her? To what had she turned with that look of frantic fear and horror? Oh, my little one. Had she thought that it was I whose steps she heard and turned to meet? What? She had fallen back across a table in the window, and her body lay half on it and half on the window seat, and her head hung down over the table, the brown hair loosened and fallen to the carpet. Her lips were drawn back and her eyes wide, wide open. They saw nothing now. What had they seen last? The doctor moved towards her, but I pushed him aside and sprang to her, caught her in my arms and cried, "It's all right, Laura, I've got you safe, wifey." She fell into my arms in a heap. I clasped her and kissed her and called her by all her pet names, but I think I knew all the time that she was dead. Her hands were tightly clenched. In one of them she held something fast. When I was quite sure that she was dead and that nothing mattered at all any more, I let him open her hand to see what she held. It was a grey marble finger. The end. Bum bum bum. Perhaps, if someone tells you with absolute conviction that really bad things happen in this house on a specific night, so bad that I refuse to be here and I'm leaving town, but I'll be back in a week, take them seriously. I don't know. Man size in marble. Yeah, I looked up Llama and saw you saying, love the author giving themselves a good phrase in the middle of the story. Yeah, it's like, I wrote this, damn, that's a banger, I need to make another character say, oh yeah. The old self-high five. Right. Let's do one more story. Let's go. This is a Body-Snatcher. This is actually a longer one, I think. I don't know. We're going to be running past the usual finishing time, but that's okay. It's a celebration of the channel, and we should do reckless and silly things like that. So, feel free to discuss that if you like. I don't know if Luce is around to drop a link for the Body-Snatcher, which I'm going to do next, but I'm going to start doing it myself just in case. And whoever gets there first has no bragging rights. Is it going to be me? Ha. There we go. Wait. Did you just... You did, and you just pinned it. Okay, cool. Because I nearly unpinned the one that was you weren't quick enough. Ah, no, it's okay. It's fine. You're welcome, Len. Again, I hope it is helping in some form. It sounds like you've been having kind of a rough evening. Not the probably it helps me reminding you of that. You're well aware, but I hope it's helping. Right, let's go on to the next one. As I say, we'll probably be finishing. Not probably. We will be finishing late, but that's okay. This is fun. This last story for tonight is by our good friend Robert Louis Stevenson. Excuse the loud slurp. That was probably right into the microphone. Yr.1, I need to hydrate. And you should too. This last story for tonight is The Body-Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson. Every night in the year, 4 of us sat together in the small parlour of the George at Debenham, the undertaker and the landlord and Fetz and myself. Sometimes there would be more, but blow high, blow low, come rain or snow or frost, we 4 would be each planted in his own particular armchair. Fetz was an old drunken Scotchman, a man of education obviously, and a man of some property since he lived in idleness. He had come to Debenham years ago, while still young, and by mere continuance of living had grown to be an adopted townsman. His blue camlet cloak was a local antiquity like the church spire. His place in the parlour at the George, his absence from church, his old, crapulous, disreputable vices were all things of course in Debenham. He had some vague, radical opinions and some fleeting infidelities, which he would now and again set forth and emphasise with tottering slaps upon the table. He drank rum, 5 glasses regularly every evening, and for the greater portion of his nightly visit to the George sat, with his glass in his right hand, in a state of melancholy alcoholic saturation. We called him the Doctor, for he was supposed to have some special knowledge of medicine, and had been known, upon a pinch, to set a fracture or reduce a dislocation, but beyond these slight particulars we had no knowledge of his character and antecedents. One dark winter night, it had struck 9 some time before the landlord joined us. There was a sick man in the George, a great neighbouring proprietor suddenly struck down with apoplexy on his way to Parliament, and the great man's still greater London doctor had been telegraphed to his bedside. It was the first time such a thing had happened in Debenham, for the railway was but newly open, and we were all proportionately moved by the occurrence. "He's come," said the landlord after he had filled and lighted his pipe. "He?" said I. "Who? Not the doctor. Himself, replied our host. What is his name? Dr. Macfarlane, said the landlord. Fetz was far through his third tumbler, stupidly fuddled, now nodding over, now staring mazily around him. But at the last word he seemed to awaken and repeating the name, Macfarlane, twice, quietly enough the first time, but with a sudden emotion in the second. Yes, said the landlord, that's his name, Dr. Wolfe Macfarlane. Fetz became instantly sober, his eyes awoke, his voice became clear, loud and steady, his language forcible and earnest. We were all startled by the transformation, as if a man had risen from the dead. I beg your pardon, he said. I'm afraid I have not been paying much attention to your talk. Who is this Wolfe Macfarlane? And then, when he had heard the landlord out, it cannot be, he added, and yet I would like well to see him face to face. Do you know him, doctor? Asked the undertaker with a gasp. God forbid, was the reply. And yet the name is a strange one. It were too much to fancy. And yet the name is a strange one. It were too much to fancy too. Tell me, landlord, is he old? Well, said the host, he's not a young man, to be sure, and his hair is white, but he looks like younger than you. He is older, though. Years older, but, with a slap upon the table, it's the rum you see in my face, rum and sin. This man, perhaps, may have an easy conscience and a good digestion. Conscience, hear me speak. You'd think I was some good old decent Christian, would you not? But no, not I. I never canted. Voltaire might have canted if he stood in my shoes, but the brains, with a rattling fillip on his bald head, the brains were clear and active, and I saw I made no deductions. If you know this, doctor, I ventured to remark after a somewhat awful pause, I should gather you do not share the landlord's good opinion. Fetz paid no regard to me. Yes, he said, with sudden decision, I must see him face to face. There was another pause, and then a door was closed rather sharply on the first floor, and a step was heard upon the stair. That's the doctor, cried the landlord. Look sharp, and you can catch him. But it was but 2 steps from the small parlour to the door of the Old George Inn. The wide oak staircase landed almost in the street. There was room for a turkey rug and nothing more between the threshold and the last round of the descent. But this little space was every evening brilliantly lit up, not only by the light upon the stair and the great signal lamp below the sign, but by the warm radiance of the bar-room window. The George thus brightly advertised itself to passers-by in the cold street. Fetz walked steadily to the spot, and we, who were hanging behind him, beheld the 2 men meet, as one of them had phrased it, face to face. Dr. Macfarlane was alert and vigorous, his white hair set off his pale and placid, although energetic countenance. He was richly dressed in the finest of the broadcloth and the whitest of linen, with a great gold watch chain and studs and spectacles of the same precious material. He wore a broad folded tie, white and speckled with lilac, and he carried on his arm a comfortable driving coat of fur. There was no doubt but he became his years, breathing, as he did, of wealth and consideration, and it was a surprising contrast to see our parlour sot, bald, dirty, pimpled, and robed in his old camlet cloak, confront him at the bottom of the stairs. Macfarlane, he said, somewhat loudly, more like a herald than a friend. The great doctor pulled up short on the 4th step, as though the familiarity of the address surprised and somewhat shocked his dignity. Toddy Macfarlane, repeated Fetz. The London man almost staggered. He stared for the swiftest of seconds at the man before him, glanced behind him with a sort of scare, and then a startled whisper. Fetz, he said. You! Aye, said the other. Me. Did you think I was dead too? We are not so easy shot of our acquaintance. Hush, hush, exclaimed the doctor. Hush, hush, this meeting is so unexpected. I can see you are unmanned. I hardly knew you, I confess, at first, but I am overjoyed to have this opportunity. For the present it must be how d'ye do and goodbye in one, for my fly is waiting, and I must not fail the train. But you shall... Let me see. Yes, you shall give me your address, and you can count on early news of me. We must do something for you, Fetz. I fear you are out at elbows, but we must see to that, for auld lang syne, as once we sang at suppers. Money, cried Fetz. Money from you. The money that I had of you is lying where I cast it in the rain. Dr. Macfarlane had talked himself into some measure of superiority and confidence, but the uncommon energy of this refusal cast him back into his first confusion. A horrible, ugly look came and went across his almost venerable countenance. "My dear fellow," he said, "be it as you please. My last thought is to offend you. I would intrude on none. I will leave you my address, however. I do not wish it. I do not wish to know the roof that shelters you," interrupted the other. "I heard your name. I feared it might be you. I wished to know if, after all, there were a God. I now know that there is none. Begone." He still stood in the middle of the rug between the stair and the doorway, and the great London physician, in order to escape, would be forced to step upon one side. It was plain that he hesitated before the thought of this humiliation. White as he was, there was a dangerous glitter in his spectacles, but while he still paused uncertain, he became aware that the driver of his fly was peering in from the street at this unusual scene, and caught a glimpse at the same time of our little body from the parlour, huddled by the corner of the bar. The presence of so many witnesses decided him at once to flee. He crouched together, brushing on the wainscot, and made a dart like a serpent striking for the door. But his tribulation was not yet entirely at an end, for even as he was passing Fetz clutched him by the arm, and these words came in a whisper and yet painfully distinct. "Have you seen it again?" The great, rich London doctor cried out aloud with a sharp, throttling cry. He dashed his questioner across the open space, and, with his hands over his head, fled out of the door like a detected thief. Before it had occurred to one of us to make a movement, the fly was already rattling towards the station. The scene was over like a dream, but the dream had left proofs and traces of its passage. Next day the servant found the fine gold spectacles crushed and broken on the threshold, and that very night were we not all standing breathless by the bar-room window, and Fetz at our side, sober, pale, and resolute in look. "God protect us, Mr. Fetz," said the landlord, coming first into possession of his customary senses. "What in the universe is all this? These are strange things you have been saying." Fetz turned towards us. He looked us each in succession in the face. "See if you can hold your tongues," said he. "That man, Macfarlane, is not safe to cross. Those that have done so already have repented it too late." And then, without so much as finishing his third glass, far less waiting for the other two, he bade us a good-bye and went forth under the lamp of the hotel into the black night. We three returned to our places in the parlour, with the big red fire and 4 clear candles, and as we recapitulated what had passed, the first chill of our surprise soon changed into a glow of curiosity. We sat late. It was the latest session I have known in the Old George. Each man before we parted had his theory that he was bound to prove, and none of us had any nearer business in this world than to track out the past of our contemned companion, and surprise the secret that he shared with the great London doctor. It is no great boast, but I believe I was a better hand at worming out a story than either of my fellows at the George, and perhaps there is now no other man alive who could narrate to you the following foul and unnatural events. In his young days, Fetz studied medicine at the schools of Edinburgh. He had talent of a kind, the talent that picks up swiftly what it hears and readily retails it for its own. He worked little at home, but he was civil, attentive, and intelligent in the presence of his masters. They soon picked him out as a lad who listened closely and remembered well, nay, strange as it seemed to me at first when I heard it, he was in those days well favoured and pleased by his exterior. There was, at this period, a certain extramural teacher of anatomy whom I shall here designate by the letter K. His name was subsequently too well known. The man who bore it skulked through the streets of Edinburgh in disguise, while the mob that applauded at the execution of Burke called loudly for the blood of his employer. But Mr. K was then at the top of his vogue. He enjoyed a popularity due partly to his own talent and address, partly to the incapacity of his rival, the university professor. The students, at least, swore by his name, and Fettes believed himself, and was believed by others, to have laid the foundations of success when he had acquired the favour of this meteorically famous man. Mr. K was a bon vivant, as well as an accomplished teacher. He liked a sly allusion no less than a careful preparation. In both capacities Fettes enjoyed and deserved his notice, and by the second year of his attendance he held the half-irregular position of second demonstrator or sub-assistant in the class. In this capacity, the charge of the theatre and lecture-room devolved in particular upon his shoulders. He had to answer for the cleanliness of the premises and the conduct of the other students, and it was a part of his duty to supply, receive, and divide the various subjects. It was with a view to this last, at that time very delicate affair, that he was lodged by Mr. K in the same wind, and at last in the same building with the dissecting rooms. Here, after a night of turbulent pleasures, his hand still tottering, his sight still misty and confused, he would be called out of bed in the black hours before the winter dawn by the unclean and desperate interlopers who supplied the table. He would open the door to these men, since infamous throughout the land. He would help them with their tragic burden, pay them their sordid price, and remain alone when they were gone with the unfriended relics of humanity. From such a scene he would return to snatch another hour or two of slumber, to repair the abuses of the night and refresh himself for the labours of the day. Few lads could have been more insensible to the impressions of a life thus passed among the ensigns of mortality. His mind was closed against all general considerations. He was incapable of interest in the fate and fortunes of another, the slave of his own desires and low ambitions. Cold, light, and selfish in the last resort, he had that modicum of prudence. Miscalled morality, which keeps a man from inconvenient drunkenness or punishable theft. He coveted besides a measure of consideration from his masters and his fellow pupils, and he had no desire to fail conspicuously in the external parts of life. Thus he made it his pleasure to gain some distinction in his studies, and day after day rendered unimpeachable eye service to his employer, Mr. K. For his day of work he indemnified himself by nights of roaring blackguardly enjoyment, and, when that balance had been struck, the organ that he called his conscience declared itself content. The supply of subjects was a continued trouble to him as well as to his master. In that large and busy class, the raw material of the anatomist kept perpetually running out, and the business thus rendered necessary was not only unpleasant in itself, but threatened dangerous consequences to all who were concerned. It was the policy of Mr. K to ask no question in his dealings with the trade. "They bring the body, we pay the price," he used to say, dwelling on the alliteration quid pro quo. And again, and somewhat profanely, ask no questions, he would tell his assistants, for conscience's sake. There was no understanding that the subjects were provided by the crime of murder. Had that idea been broached to him in words, he would have recoiled in horror, but the lightness of his speech upon so grave a matter was in itself an offence against good manners, and a temptation to the men with whom he dealt. Fettes, for instance, had often remarked to himself upon the singular freshness of the bodies. He had been struck again and again by the hangdog, abominable looks of the ruffians who came to him before the dawn, and putting things together clearly in his private thoughts, he perhaps attributed a meaning too immoral and too categorical to the unguarded counsels of his master. He understood his duty, in short, to have three branches to take what was brought. To have three branches. To take what was brought, to pay the price, and to avert the eye from any evidence of crime. One November morning this policy of silence was put sharply to the test. He had been awake all night with racking toothache, pacing his room like a caged beast, or throwing himself in fury on his bed, and had fallen at last into that profound, uneasy slumber that so often follows on a night of pain, when he was awakened by the third or fourth angry repetition of the concerted signal. There was a thin, bright moonshine. It was bitter cold, windy, and frosty. The town had not yet awakened, but an indefinable stir had already preluded the noise and business of the day. The ghouls had come later than usual, and they seemed more than usually eager to be gone. Fats, sick with sleep, lighted them upstairs. He heard their grumbling Irish voices through a dream. As they stripped the sack from their sad merchandise, he leaned, dozing, with his shoulder propped against the wall. He had to shake himself to find the men their money. As he did so, his eyes lighted on the dead face. He stared, and took 2 steps nearer with the candle raised. "God Almighty!" he cried. "That is Jean Galbraith!" The men answered nothing, but they shuffled nearer towards the door. "I know her, I tell you," he continued. "She was alive and hearty yesterday. It's impossible she can be dead. It's impossible you should have got this body fairly." "Sure, sir, you're mistaken entirely," said one of the men, but the other looked Fett darkly in the eyes and demanded his money on the spot. It was impossible to misconceive the threat or to exaggerate the danger. The lad's heart failed him. He stammered some excuses, counted out the sum, and saw his hateful visitors depart. No sooner were they gone than he hastened to confirm his doubts. By a dozen unquestionable marks he identified the girl he had jested with the day before. He saw with horror marks upon her body that might well betoken violence. A panic seized him, and he took refuge in the room. There he reflected at length over the discovery that he had made, considered soberly the bearing of Mr. K's instructions, and the danger to himself of interference in so serious a business, and at last, in sore perplexity, determined to wait for the advice of his immediate superior, the class assistant. This was a young doctor, Wolfe Macfarlane, a high favourite among all the reckless students, clever, dissipated, and unscrupulous to the last degree. He had travelled and studied abroad. His manners were agreeable and a little forward. He was an authority upon the stage, skilful on the ice or the links with skate or golf club. He dressed with nice audacity, and, to put the finishing touch upon his glory, he kept a gig and a strong trotting horse. With Fetz he was on terms of intimacy. Indeed, their relative positions called for some community of life, and when subjects were scarce, the pair would drive far into the country in Macfarlane's gig, visit and desecrate some lonely graveyard, and return before dawn with their booty to the door of the dissecting room. On that particular morning Macfarlane arrived somewhat earlier than his wont. Fetz heard him and met him on the stairs, told him his story, and showed him the cause of alarm. Macfarlane examined the ecchymosis. "Yes," he said with a nod, "it looks fishy." "Well, what should I do?" asked Fetz. "Do?" repeated the other. "Do you want to do anything? Least said soonest mended, I should say." "Someone else might recognise her," objected Fetz. "She was as well known as a Castle Rock." "We'll hope not," said Macfarlane, "and if anybody does, well, you didn't, don't you see, and there's an end. The fact is, this has been going on too long. Stir up the mud and you'll get K into the most unholy trouble. You'll be in a shocking box yourself, so will I, if you come to that. I should like to know how any one of us would look, or what the devil we should have to say for ourselves in any Christian witness box. For me, you know, there's one thing certain, that, practically speaking, all our subjects have been murdered." "Macfarlane!" cried Fetz. "Come now," sneered the other, as if you hadn't suspected it yourself." "Suspecting is one thing, and proof another. Yes, I know, and I'm as sorry as you are this should have come here," tapping the body with his cane. The next best thing for me is not to recognise it, and," he added coolly, "I don't." You may, if you please. I don't dictate, but I think a man of the world would do as I do. And I may add, I fancy that what Kay would look for at our hands. The question is, why did he choose us two for his assistants? And I answer, because he didn't want old wives. This was the tone of all others to affect the mind of a lad like Fetz. He agreed to imitate Macfarlane. The body of the unfortunate girl was duly dissected, and no one remarked or appeared to recognize her. One afternoon, when his day's work was over, Fetz dropped into a popular tavern and found Macfarlane sitting with a stranger. This was a small man, very pale and dark, with cold black eyes. The cut of his features gave a promise of intellect and refinement which was but feebly realized in his manners, for he proved, upon a nearer acquaintance, coarse, vulgar, and stupid. He exercised, however, a very remarkable control over Macfarlane, issued orders like the great Bashaw, became inflamed at the least discussion or delay, and commented rudely on the civility with which he was obeyed. This most offensive person took a fancy to Fetz on the spot, plied him with drinks, and honoured him with unusual confidences on his past career. If a tenth of what he confessed were true, he was a very loathsome rogue, and the lad's vanity was tickled by the attention of so experienced a man. I'm a pretty bad fellow myself, the stranger remarked, but Macfarlane is the boy. Toddy Macfarlane, I call him. Toddy, order your friend another glass. Or it might be, Toddy, you jump up and shut that door. Toddy hates me, he said again. Oh, yes, Toddy, you do. Don't you call him that confounded name, growled Macfarlane. Hear him! Did you ever see the lads play knife? He would like to do that all over my body, remarked the stranger. We medicals have a better way than that, said Fetz. When we dislike a dear friend of ours, we dissect him. Macfarlane looked up sharply, as though this jest was scarcely to his mind. I've got the accents wrong somewhere like that, I think. The afternoon passed. Gray, for that was his stranger's name, invited Fetz to... The afternoon passed. Gray, for that was the stranger's name, invited Fetz to join them at dinner, ordered a feast so sumptuous that the tavern was thrown into commotion, and when all was done commanded Macfarlane to settle the bill. It was late before they separated. The man, Gray, was incapably drunk. Macfarlane, sobered by his fury, chewed the end of the money he had been forced to squander, and the slights he had been obliged to swallow. Fetz, with various liquors singing in his head, returned home with devious footsteps and a mind entirely in abeyance. Next day Macfarlane was absent from the class, and Fetz smiled to himself as he imagined him still squiring the intolerable Gray from tavern to tavern. As soon as the hour of liberty had struck, he posted from place to place in quest of his last night's companions. He could find them, however, nowhere, returned early to his rooms, went early to bed, and slept the sleep of the just. At 4 in the morning he was wakened by the well-known signal. Descending to the door, he was filled with astonishment to find Macfarlane with his gig, and, in the gig, one of those long and ghastly packages with which he was so well acquainted. "What?" he cried. "Have you been out alone? How did you manage?" But Macfarlane silenced him roughly, bidding him turn to business. When they had got the body upstairs and laid it on the table, Macfarlane made at first as if he were going away. Then he paused and seemed to hesitate, and then, "You had better look at the face," said he, in tones of some constraint. "You had better," he repeated, as Fetz only stared at him in wonder. "But where and how and when did you come by it?" cried the other. "Look at the face," was the only answer. Fetz was staggered. Strange doubts assailed him. He looked from the young doctor to the body and then back again. At last, with a start, he did as he was bidden. He had almost expected the sight that met the eyes, and yet the shock was cruel. To see, fixed in the rigidity of death and naked on that coarse layer of sackcloth, the man whom he had left well clad and full of meat and sin upon the threshold of a tavern, awoke, even in the thoughtless Fett, some of the terrors of the conscience. It was a crass tebe which re-echoed in his soul that two whom he had known should have come to lie upon these icy tables. Yet these were only secondary thoughts. His first concern regarded Wolfe. Unprepared for a challenge so momentous, he knew not how to look his comrade in the face. He durst not meet his eye, and he had neither words nor voice at his command. It was MacFarlane himself who made the first advance. He came up quietly behind and laid his hand gently but firmly on the other's shoulder. "Richardson," said he, "may have the head." Now, Richardson was a student who had long been anxious for that portion of the human subject to dissect. There was no answer, and the murderer resumed. "Talking of business, you must pay me. Your accounts, you see, must tally." Fetz found a voice, the ghost of his own. "Pay you?" he cried. "Pay you for that?" "Why, yes, of course you must. By all means and on every possible account you must," returned the other. "I dare not give it for nothing. You dare not take it for nothing. It would compromise us both. This is another case like Jane Galbraith's. The more things are wrong, the more we must act as if all were right. Where does Kay keep his money?" "There," answered Fetz hoarsely, pointing to a cupboard in the corner. "Give me the key, then," said the other, calmly holding out his hand. There was an instant's hesitation, and the die was cast. MacFarlane could not suppress a nervous twitch, the infinitesimal mark of an immense relief, as he felt the key between his fingers. He opened the cupboard, brought out pen and ink and a paper book that stood in one compartment, and separated from the funds in the drawer a sum suitable to the occasion. "Now, look here," he said. "There is the payment made. First proof of your good faith, first step to your security. You have now to clinch it by a second. Enter the payment in your book, and then you, for your part, may defy the devil." The next few seconds were, for Fetz, an agony of thought, but in balancing his terrors it was the most immediate that triumphed. Any future difficulty seemed almost welcome if he could avoid a present quarrel with MacFarlane. He set down the candle which he had been carrying all this time, and with a steady hand entered the date, the nature, and the amount of the transaction. "And now," said MacFarlane, "it's only fair that you should pocket the lucre. I've had my share already. By the by, when the man of the world falls into a bit of luck, has a few extra shillings in his pocket, I'm ashamed to speak of it, but there's a rule of conduct in the case. No treating, no purchase of expensive class books, no squaring of old debts. Borrow, don't lend." "MacFarlane," began Fetz, still somewhat hoarsely, "I have put my neck in a halter to oblige you." "To oblige me?" cried Wolfe. "Oh, come, you did, as near as I can see the matter, what you downright had to do in self-defence. Suppose I got into trouble, where would you be? This second little matter flows clearly from the first. Mr. Grey is the continuation of Miss Galbraith. You can't begin and then stop. If you begin, you must keep on beginning. That's the truth. No rest for the wicked." A horrible sense of blackness and the treachery of fate seized hold upon the soul of the unhappy student. "My God," he cried, "but what have I done? And when did I begin? To be made a class assistant in the name of reason, where's the harm in that? Service wanted the position, Service might have got it. Would he have been where I am now?" "My dear fellow," said MacFarlane, "what a boy you are! What harm has come to you? What harm can come to you if you hold your tongue? Why, man, do you know what this life is? There are two squads of us, the lions and the lambs. If you're a lamb, you'll come to lie upon these tables like Grey or Jane Galbraith. If you're a lion, you'll live and drive a horse like me, like Kay, like all the world with any wit or courage. You're staggered at the first. But look at Kay. My dear fellow, you're clever, you have pluck. I like you, and Kay likes you. You were born to lead the hunt, and I tell you, on my honour and my experience of life, 3 days from now, you'll laugh at all these scarecrows like a high school boy at a farce." And with that, MacFarlane took his departure and drove off up the Wynd in his gig to get under cover before daylight. Fettes was thus left alone with his regrets. He saw the miserable peril in which he stood involved. He saw with inexpressible dismay that there was no limit to his weakness, and that, from concession to concession, he had fallen from the arbiter of MacFarlane's destiny to his paid and helpless accomplice. He would have given the world to have been a little braver at the time, but it did not occur to him that he might still be brave. The secret of Jane Galbraith and the cursed entry in the daybook closed his mouth. Hours passed. The class began to arrive. The members of the unhappy Grey were dealt out to one and to another, and received without remark. Richardson was made happy with the head, and before the hour of freedom rang, Fettes trembled with exultation to perceive how far they had already gone towards safety. For 2 days he continued to watch with increasing joy the dreadful process of disguise. On the 3rd day MacFarlane made his appearance. He had been ill, he said, but he made up for lost time by the energy with which he directed the students. To Richardson in particular he extended the most valuable assistance and advice, and that student, encouraged by the praise of the demonstrator, burned high with ambitious hopes and saw the medal already in his grasp. Before the week was out, MacFarlane's prophecy had been fulfilled. Fettes had outlived his terrors and forgotten his abasement. He began to plume himself upon his courage, and had so arranged the story in his mind that he could look back on these events with an unhealthy pride. Of his accomplice he saw but little. They met, of course, in the business of the class. They received their orders together from Mr. K. At times they had a word or two in private, and MacFarlane was from first to last particularly kind and jovial. But it was plain that he avoided any reference to their common secret, and even when Fettes whispered to him that he had cast in his lot with the lions and forsworn the lambs, he only signed to him smilingly to hold his peace. At length an occasion arose which threw the pair once more into a closer union. Mr. K. was again short of subjects, pupils were eager, and it was part of this teacher's pretensions to be always well supplied. At the same time there came the news of a burial in the rustic graveyard of Glencorse. Time has little changed the place in question. It stood then, as now, upon a crossroad out of call of human habitations, and buried fathom deep in the foliage of 6 cedar trees. The cries of the sheep upon the neighbouring hills, the streamlets upon either hand, one loudly singing among pebbles, the other dripping furtively from pond to pond, the stir of the wind in mountainous old flowering chestnuts, and, once in 7 days, the voice of the bell and the old tunes of the precentor were the only sounds that disturbed the silence round the rural church. The Resurrection Man, to use a by-name of the period, was not to be deterred by any of the sanctities of customary piety. It was part of his trade to despise and desecrate the scrolls and trumpets of the tombs, the paths worn by the feet of worshippers and mourners, and the offerings and the inscriptions of bereaved affection. To rustic neighbourhoods where love is more than commonly tenacious, and where some bonds of blood or fellowship unite the entire society of a parish, the Body-Snatcher, far from being repelled by natural respect, was attracted by the ease and safety of his task. To bodies that had been laid in the earth in joyful expectation of a far different awakening, there came that hasty, lamp-lit, terror-haunted resurrection of the spade and mattock. The coffin was forced, the cerements torn, and the melancholy relics, clad in sackcloth, after being rattled for hours on moonless byways, were at length exposed to uttermost indignities before a class of gaping boys. Somewhat as 2 vultures may swoop upon a dying lamb, Fettes and MacFarlane were to be let loose upon a grave in that green and quiet resting-place. The wife of a farmer A woman who had lived for 60 years, had been known for nothing but good butter and a godly conversation, was to be rooted from her grave at midnight and carried dead and naked to that far-away city that she had always honoured with her Sunday's best. The place beside her family was to be empty till the crack of doom, her innocent and almost venerable members to be exposed to that last curiosity of the anatomist. Late one afternoon the pair set forth, well wrapped in cloaks and furnished with a formidable bottle. It rained without remission, a cold, dense, lashing rain. Now and again there blew a puff of wind, but these sheets of falling water kept it down. Bottle and all, it was a sad and silent drive as far as Penicuik, where they were to spend the evening. They stopped once to hide their implements in a thick bush not far from the churchyard, and once again at the Fisher's Tryst, to have a toast before the kitchen fire, and vary their nips of whisky with a glass of ale. When they reached their journey's end, the gig was housed, the horse was fed and comforted, and the two young doctors, in a private room, sat down to the best dinner and the best wine the house afforded. The lights, the fire, the beating rain upon the window, the cold, incongruous work that lay before them added zest to their enjoyment of the meal. With every glass their cordiality increased. Soon Macfarlane handed a little pile of gold to his companion. "A compliment," he said. "Between little friends these accommodations ought to fly like pipelights." Vetz pocketed the money and applauded the sentiment to the echo. "You are a philosopher," he cried. "I was an ass till I knew you. You and Kay between you, by the Lord Harry, you'll make a man of me." "Of course we shall," applauded Macfarlane. "A man? I'll tell you it required a man to back me up the other morning. There are some big, brawling 40-year-old cowards would have turned sick at the look of the dead thing. But not you. You kept your head. I watched you." "Well, and why not?" Vetz thus vaunted himself. "It was no affair of mine. There was nothing to gain on the one side but disturbance. Only on the other I could count your gratitude, don't you see?" And he slapped his pocket till the gold pieces rang. Macfarlane somehow felt a certain touch of alarm at these unpleasant words. He may have regretted that he had taught his young companion so successfully, but he had no time to interfere, for the other noisily continued in this boastful strain. "The great thing is not to be afraid. Now, between you and me, I don't want to hang. That's practical. But for all cant, Macfarlane, I was born with a contempt. Hell, God, devil, right, wrong, sin, crime, and all that old gallery of curiosities. They may frighten boys, but men of the world like you and me despise them. Here's to the memory of Grey." It was by this time growing somewhat late. The gig, according to order, was brought round to the door with both lamps brightly shining, and the young men had to pay their bill and take the road. They announced that they were bound for Peebles, drove in that direction till they were clear of the last house of the town, then, extinguishing the lamps, returned upon their course and followed a by-road towards Glencorse. There was no sound but that of their own passage, and the incessant, strident pouring of the rain. It was pitch dark. Here and there a white grate, or a white stone in the wall guided them for a short space across the night, but for the most part it was at a foot's pace and almost groping that they picked their way through that resonant blackness to their solemn and isolated destination. In the sunken roads that traversed the neighbourhood of the burying ground, the last glimmer failed them, and it became necessary to kindle a match and re-illume one of the lanterns of the gig. Thus, under the dripping trees, and environed by huge and moving shadows, they reached the scene of their unhallowed labours. They were both experienced in such affairs, and powerful with the spade, and they had scarce been 20 minutes at their task before they were rewarded by a dull rattle on the coffin lid. At the same moment Macfarlane, having hurt his hand upon a stone, flung it carelessly above his head. The grave, in which they now stood almost to the shoulders, was close to the edge of the plateau of the graveyard, and the gig lamp had been propped, the better to illuminate their labours, against a tree, and on the immediate verge of the steep bank descending to the stream. Chance had taken a sure aim with the stone. Then came a clang of broken glass. Night fell upon them. Sounds alternately dull and ringing announced the bounding of the lantern down the bank, and its occasional collision with the trees. A stone or two, which it had dislodged in its descent, rattled behind it into the profundities of the glen, and then silence, like night, resumed its sway. And they might bend their hearing to its utmost pitch, but naught was to be heard except the rain, now marching to the wind, now steadily falling over miles of open country. They were so nearly at an end of their abhorrent task that they judged it wiser to complete it in the dark. The coffin was exhumed and broken open, the body inserted in the dripping sack and carried between them to the gig, one mounted to keep it in its place, and the other, taking the horse by the mouth, groped along by the wall and bush until they reached the wider road by the Fisher's Tryst. Here was a faint, diffused radiancy, which they hailed like daylight. By that they pushed the horse to a good pace and began to rattle almost merrily in the direction of the town. They had both been wetted to the skin during their operations, and now, as the gig jumped among the deep ruts, the thing that stood propped between them fell now upon the one and now upon the other. At every repetition of the horrid contact, each instinctively repelled it with the greater haste, and the process, natural although it was, began to tell upon the nerves of the companions. Macfarlane made some ill-favoured jest about the farmer's wife, but it came hollowly from his lips, and was allowed to drop in silence. Still their unnatural burden bumped from side to side, and now the head would be laid, as if in confidence, upon their shoulders, and now the drenching sackcloth would flap icily about their faces. A creeping chill began to possess the soul of Fetz. He peered at the bundle, and it seemed somehow larger than at first. All over the countryside, and from every degree of distance, the farm dogs accompanied their passage with tragic ululations, and it grew and grew upon his mind that some unnatural miracle had been accomplished, that some nameless change had befallen the dead body, and that it was in fear of their unholy burden that the dogs were howling. "For God's sake," said he, making a great effort to arrive at speech, "for God's sake, let's have a light." Seemingly Macfarlane was affected in the same direction, for, though he made no reply, he stopped the horse, passed the reins to his companion, got down, and proceeded to kindle the remaining lamp. They had, by that time, got no farther than the crossroad down to Auchenclinny. The rain still poured as though the deluge were returning, and it was no easy matter to make a light in such a world of wet and darkness. When at last the flickering blue flame had been transferred to the wick, and began to expand and clarify, and shed a wide circle of misty brightness round the gig, it became possible for the two young men to see each other, and the thing they had along with them. The rain had moulded the rough sacking to the outlines of the body underneath. The head was distinct from the trunk, the shoulders plainly modelled. Something at once spectral and human riveted their eyes upon the ghastly comrade of their drive. For some time Macfarlane stood motionless, holding up the hand. A nameless dread was swathed like a wet sheet about the body, and tightened the white skin upon the face of Fetz. A fear that was meaningless, a horror of what could not be, kept mounting in his brain. Another beat of the watch, and he had spoken, but his comrade forestalled him. "That is not a woman," said Macfarlane in a hushed voice. "It was a woman when we put her in," whispered Fetz. "Hold the lamp," said the other. "I must see her face." And as Fetz took the lamp, his companion untied the fastenings of the sack and drew down the cover from the head. The light fell very clear upon the dark, well-moulded features and smooth-shaven cheeks of a too familiar countenance, often beheld in dreams by both of these young men. A wild yell rang up into the night. Each leaped from his own side into the roadway. The lamp fell, broke and was extinguished, and the horse, terrified by this unusual commotion, bounded and went off towards Edinburgh at a gallop, bearing along with it, sole occupant of the gig, the body of the long dead and long dissected Grey. The end. Don't kill people, folks. That's the moral of that story. Yeah, easy lesson. Trust most of you are capable of following it. Otherwise you get ghosts. That's what you do. It's ghosts. But yes. No, you're welcome, Lynn. And you keep saying that, but it keeps being appropriate. Yeah, and also, yes, don't rob graves. Yeah, part of me, when reading, like, checking through that one earlier, was like, there's a theme here. But like a micro theme that has crossed like 2 nights, with that also happening, possibly, perhaps a little bit, maybe in A Tale of Two Cities last night, and again tonight. Who knows what tomorrow shall bring? Maybe P.G. Wodehouse wrote about grave robbers. I can't say. Be an odd theme, but you're going to have to come back and find out. Indeed, says Lucy, who is more familiar with his work. So, maybe there is. But right, that is me done for tonight. I'm going to be back on Saturday to read you probably some more William Hope Hodgson. None of that in Wodehouse. That indeed was for Dickens. Dinger, as they say. But yeah, do come back first of all tomorrow, where, as I say, Lucy's going to be reading you some comedy, some very good comedy from P.G. Wodehouse, famed comedy writer. It is not going to be like full stories. It's a similar deal to my sci-fi stuff on Monday. This is stuff that is not like public domain. It is not long enough since the author's died. I think Wodehouse died in the 70s. So we've got some time before we can read that on here, like full things in good conscience. But your absolute favourite comedy author. Nice. But David Walliams... No, I can't even finish that sentence. The man is repulsive. But I'm going to go. But yes, as I say, I invite you back tomorrow to listen to some Wodehouse comedy. And then I invite you to come back... Yeah, I know, sorry. Okay. I even felt bad getting halfway through that sentence. Next week he's going to see Baron for streams. No, that's... well, I mean... firstly, it will. And I guess I am sorry for contributing to that particular feeling, because we just want it to be nice. What it means though is that you've got an event to look forward to next year. This is sort of how I like me going into, say, like the Desert Bus week, when it's like, oh hell yeah, I've just got like a full solid week booked out now of just solid streams. I can just go and turn on Twitch and watch the thing, and then when it ends, like, no, that was sad, it's gone. But then I start looking forward to next year's Desert Bus. And yeah, the hope is to make this like an annual thing. I would quite like this to be a returning feature of the channel, that every year we do like a thing like this, and we can like modify it, expand it, tweak it, do different things. So make it a bit of a celebration. So yeah, I'm glad that in a kind of weird sense, I'm glad that it's having that effect, because it means it's been a good week. And putting on the philosopher hat, it's what are good things but something you miss when they're over. So yeah, that's very good, Sam. Well done. Yeah, let's put that on a postcard. Yeah. What is grief but love persisting? That sort of thing. But yeah, I'm gonna go. Do come back tomorrow for Wodehouse. Do come back on Saturday for more William Hope Hodgson, as it's likely to be. And then come back on Sunday for myself and Lucy reading you some plays and poems, which we are going to go through tomorrow and actually try and pick out which ones we shall do. If I will probably try and fit the chaos in there somewhere, because that's like my little party piece. and it's a good way to fill up about 20 minutes. But yeah, we'll be doing that. So come back and see how that goes on Sunday, and then the week will be over, and we'll be back to the normal schedule. But it doesn't actually look like there's anyone on particular that I'm in a rush to raid. I could have a quick look on the reading aloud tag if you will bear with me a second, but I think I might just be piecing out. I see there is One Piece read along. There's a channel just reading through One Piece. That's maybe the Normies TV. Does anyone know them? What are they like? Should we raid a bizarre channel? Well, I say bizarre. I don't know who they are. I'm just having a quick look, so don't mind me. We're the Normies who do Let's Plays, podcasts, watch-alongs, and more. Okay. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I mean, they seem chill, but I'm not sure. What are your rules? Oh, followers only chat. Ah, that's a pain. Yes, I shan't then. Apologies. Nah, it's alright, Lynn. I think it's late anyway, and I'm kind of tired. But thank you for the offer. Oh, Pirelli, you watch some Normies on YouTube? Yeah, it's like for them in particular, it's because they have like follower only chat, and so then you have to like raid over and follow and stuff. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll have a quick look. But actually, yeah, if it's all the same, I'm just gonna raid. Well, not raid. So I'm just gonna run. Because as I say, it's late, and I'm quite tired, and especially if it's like a new channel that doesn't know us, then I have to stick around and do the whole "Hi, it's me." But I will bear them in mind for a future raid. And once again, thank you for suggesting. I appreciate it. But yes, I'm going to go, and I will send you to an end screen, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Goodbye and good night.